Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Tom Garrett, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years. Started when I was just 16, working alongside my dad on these same mountain trails. Now I'm 29, got a wife named Martha, and 2 little boys back home. I know every hollow, every ridge, every deer path in the George Washington National Forest like they're rooms in my own house. But what happened up on Devil's Backbone Ridge in October of 1962 changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. People always said the old-timers were crazy with their stories about mountain witches and spirits that lived in the deep hollows. I laughed along with everyone else. Mountain folk love their ghost stories, especially when the leaves start turning and the nights get cold. But I'm here to tell you something. Those old-timers weren't crazy. They were trying to warn us. It started on a Tuesday morning when Sheriff Bradley called the ranger station. 3 college boys from the University of Virginia had been missing for 3 days. Their car was found at the Devil's Backbone trailhead with camping gear still in the trunk. Their names were Michael, David, and Robert, all archaeology students, 20 years old, full of book learning, but not much mountain sense. I knew that area better than anyone. Devil's Backbone Ridge runs for about 15 miles through some of the roughest country in Virginia. It's where the Cherokee used to hunt before the white settlers came. During the Civil War, both armies marched through there, and plenty of boys died in those woods. The ridge got its name because when you look at it from the valley, it looks like the spine of some giant buried beast. The thing about Devil's Backbone is that once you get up there, you're on your own. Radio doesn't work because of all the rock formations. Nearest help is 30 miles away down winding mountain roads. If something I was wrong up there. You better know how to fix it yourself. I loaded my Ford pickup with search gear and headed up the mountain. The October air was cold and sharp with that smell of dying leaves and coming frost. Fog was starting to roll in from the valleys, which meant visibility would get bad fast. At the trailhead, I found their car, a blue Plymouth with Virginia plates. The camping gear was there like the sheriff said, but something felt wrong. These boys had packed for a week-long trip but only took day packs up the mountain. That didn't make sense. You don't leave your sleeping bags and tent behind if you're planning to camp. I started following their trail up the ridge. The ground was soft from recent rain, so their boot prints showed up clear as day. But here's what bothered me. Their tracks led straight up the mountain, taking the hardest possible route. Any fool knows you follow the valleys when you're carrying heavy packs. These boys were heading up like they had someplace specific to go. About 2 miles up, I found their first campsite. They'd built a fire ring, but it was all wrong. Instead of a simple circle of rocks like any normal person would make, they'd arranged the stones in some kind of pattern. Looked almost like symbols. And scattered around the fire were things that didn't belong. Bits of pottery, some old bones, what looked like arrowheads. That's when I started to get an uneasy feeling in my stomach. These archaeology boys hadn't just gotten lost. They'd been digging around up here, looking for Indian artifacts, and from what I could see, they'd found some. The mountain got real quiet then. I've spent my whole life in these woods, and I know mountain quiet. Usually it's peaceful, just wind in the trees, maybe a bird calling, squirrels chattering. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. And like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I checked my compass and radio before heading deeper into the woods. The compass needle was jumping around like it couldn't make up its mind. Which way was north? When I tried the radio, all I got was static mixed with something that sounded like voices calling from very far away. Equipment problems happen in the mountains. Rocks can mess with compasses, and radio signals bounce around these ridges in funny ways. I told myself it was nothing to worry about. But my dad always taught me to trust my gut in the woods, and my gut was telling me something was very wrong up on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The boys' trail kept going up, and I kept following. I had to find them before dark, because fog was rolling in thick, and once night fell, searching would be impossible. I just wish I'd turned around right then and walked back to my truck. 3 miles up the trail, I found David. He was hanging 20 feet up in an old oak tree, his body twisted in the branches like he'd been thrown there by a tornado. But there hadn't been any storms that week, and there wasn't any rope or climbing gear anywhere around. I stared up at that boy for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. His face was white as paper, mouth open like he'd been screaming. His eyes were wide with terror, the kind of fear that stops your heart. I've seen men die in these mountains before. Bears, falls, heart attacks. But I'd never seen a look like that on anyone's face. I called for my partner, Jim Bradley, on the radio. Jim had been ranging these mountains for 8 years, and he knew Devil's Backbone almost as well as I did. Through the static, I managed to tell him where I was and what I'd found. "Stay put, Tom," his voice crackled back. "I'm bringing dogs and a recovery team. Be there in 2 hours." 2 hours felt like 2 days. I made camp under that tree and tried not to look up at David hanging there in the branches. The fog was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping fast. By the time I heard Jim's truck grinding up the mow, Annan Road, it felt like winter had come early to Devil's Backbone Ridge. Jim brought 3 other rangers and 2 tracking dogs, Scout and Rex, the best search dogs in the Forest Service. These dogs had found lost hikers, escaped prisoners, even dead bodies buried under avalanches. There wasn't much they couldn't track, but when we brought them to the base of that oak tree, both dogs started whimpering and backing away. Scout, who'd never shown fear of anything in his life, lay down flat on his belly and wouldn't move. Rex started howling, not barking, but a long, mournful sound like he was mourning something. "What's got into them?" Jim asked, pulling on Rex's leash. I didn't have an answer. The dogs kept looking up at David's body and whining. Then Scout did something I'll never forget. He looked right at me, and his eyes were full of human fear. Not dog fear, the kind of afraid that comes from understanding something terrible is about to happen. That's when Scout just died. Right there at the base of the tree. No warning, no sickness. His heart just stopped, and he fell over on his side with that same look of terror on his face that David had up in the branches. Jim stared at his dead dog, then at David's body, then at me. "Tom, what the hell happened up here?" Before I could answer, we heard a woman's voice calling from deeper in the woods. "Help me! Please, someone help me!" The voice was clear as a bell, coming from maybe half a mile up the ridge. It sounded young, scared, desperate. Could be someone else was lost up here. Could be one of the other college boys had found a girl hiker in trouble. "That way," Jim pointed toward the sound. "Come on." We left 2 rangers with David's body and Rex, who wouldn't stop howling. Jim and I headed up the ridge toward the voice. The fog was so thick now we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Our flashlight beams just buzzed back at us like we were walking through clouds. "Help! I'm hurt! Please!" The voice came again, but this time it seemed to be coming from a different direction. Jim looked at me with confusion. "Did she move?" We changed course, following the sound. But every time we got close to where the voice seemed to be coming from, it would call out from somewhere else. We spent an hour walking in circles through that thick fog, following a woman who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. That's when I realized what was happening. The voice wasn't leading us to someone who needed help. It was leading us away from camp, away from help, deeper into the hollow where the fog was thickest and the mountain was darkest. "Jim," I said, grabbing his arm, "we need to go back." "But there's someone out there who needs—" "No," I said, and my voice came out harder than I meant it to. "There's no woman out there. Listen to how her voice moves around. Listen to how it never gets closer no matter how far we walk." Jim stopped and tilted his head, really listening for the first time. The voice called again. "Please, I'm so scared." But now we could both hear that it was coming from 3 different directions at once. "What is that?" Jim whispered. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. Our breath started coming out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the tree branches around us. In the middle of October, it felt like January. That's when we saw the trees. Every oak and maple in sight had symbols carved deep into their bark. Not fresh cuts, but old scars that had healed over with new growth. The markings looked like Cherokee writing, but older somehow, cruder, like someone had been carving warnings into these trees for hundreds of years. "Tom," Jim's voice was shaking now. "I think we're on Cherokee burial ground." He was right. I should have realized it sooner. All the signs were there. The unnatural quiet, the way the animals acted, the cold spots where spirits were supposed to walk. My Cherokee friend Billy had told me rise about places like this when we were kids. Sacred places where his people buried their medicine men and warriors. Places white men weren't supposed to go. The woman's voice called one more time, but now it didn't sound quite human. It was too high, too pure, like wind blowing through a hollow log. "We're leaving," I said. "Right now." But when we turned to head back to camp, the fog had gotten so thick we couldn't see the way we'd come. Our own footprints had disappeared like the mountain had swallowed them up. We were lost on Devil's Backbone Ridge, and something that wasn't human was calling to us from the darkness. We walked for what felt like hours trying to find our way back to camp. The fog was so thick it was like being wrapped in wet wool. Our flashlights couldn't cut through it, and every tree looked the same. Worse, the symbols carved in the bark seemed to be everywhere now, covering every oak and pine we passed. "There," Jim pointed ahead. "I see light." Through the fog, we could make out the glow of our camp lanterns. We hurried toward them, relieved to have found our way back. But when we got close enough to see clearly, we realized something was wrong. The camp was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. David's body was gone from the oak tree. "Where is he?" Jim called to the two rangers we'd left behind. Ranger Murphy came jogging over, his face pale. "Gone when we turned around from checking on Rex. One minute he was up there, next minute the branches were empty. No rope, no ladder, nothing. Like he just vanished." "People don't just vanish from 20 feet up in a tree," Jim said. But I was looking at the oak tree, and I could see that some of the branches were broken, like something had pulled David out of them with tremendous force. There were scratch marks in the bark, too, long, deep gouges that went all the way around the trunk. X was still howling. The sound was getting on everyone's nerves, but every time someone tried to calm him down, he'd just howl louder. He kept looking up at the empty branches and crying, like his heart was broken. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Pack everything up, we're heading back to town." "What about the other two boys?" Murphy asked. "Michael and Robert are still missing." I wanted to say we'd come back in the morning with more men and better equipment. I wanted to say a lot of things. But before I could speak, the woman's voice came floating through the fog again. Tom Garrett." It knew my name. Jim grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "How does it know your name?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Tom, come find me. I need you." It wasn't the scared young woman we'd heard before. This voice was older, sadder, with an accent I couldn't place. Cherokee, maybe, or something even older. And underneath the words, I could hear something else. A sound like wind through dead leaves, or maybe crying that had gone on so long it had forgotten how to stop. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Nobody make a sound." The fog around our camp started to swirl, moving in patterns that didn't match the wind. It formed spirals and waves like invisible hands were stirring it around. The temperature dropped again until our breath came out in white clouds and frost formed on our gear. That's when we saw her. She came floating out of the fog about 50 yards away, her feet not quite touching the ground. She was an old Cherokee woman wearing traditional dress, deerskin decorated with beads and shells. Her long gray hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her face was painted with symbols that matched the ones carved in the trees. But her eyes were holes of darkness that seemed to go on forever. "Who disturbed my rest?" she asked, and her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Who took what was not theirs to take? She was looking right at me, and I could feel those black holes of eyes seeing into my soul. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. None of us could move. We just stood there like deer caught in headlights, watching this impossible thing float toward us. The young ones came in the night, she continued. They dug in sacred earth. They stole bones of my people. They broke the seals that kept me sleeping. I finally found my voice. We didn't take anything. We're just looking for missing hikers. She tilted her head like a bird studying a bug it was about to eat. You wear the clothes of the forest guardians, but you do not guard the sacred places. You let them dig. You let them steal. We didn't know, I said. We're sorry. We'll make it right. She laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking inside my head. Too late for sorry. The seals are broken. The angry dead are awake. Now they hunger. She raised one hand, and the fog around us started to move faster, spinning like a tornado. Inside the spinning mist, I could see shapes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Moving in ways that human bodies aren't supposed to move. Jim, I whispered. When I say run, you run for the truck. Don't stop. Don't look back. But Jim wasn't listening. He was staring at the Cherokee woman with his mouth hanging open, and his eyes were starting to look like David's had, wide with terror and understanding of something too awful to accept. The woman pointed at Jim, and he started walking toward her. Not walking, floating, his feet barely touching the ground, like she was pulling him with invisible strings. Jim, fight it! He looked back at me, and I could see he was trying to resist, but his body kept moving forward. Tom, he said, his voice strange and dreamy. Tom, she's showing me things. The boys, what they did to the burial mounds. What's waiting for us? Jim, don't listen to her! But it was too late. Jim reached the edge of the ridge where the G-she round dropped away into darkness. The Cherokee woman smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. See how the guilty fall, she said. Jim stepped off the cliff. I heard him scream all the way down, a sound that lasted much too long and ended much too suddenly. The woman turned those black hole eyes back to me. Now you know. Now you understand. The mountains remember everything. The dead remember everything. And we are very, very angry. She opened her mouth, and what came out wasn't a scream or a wail or anything human. It was the sound of every person who had ever died in these mountains crying out at once. It was the sound of Cherokee warriors falling to cavalry bullets, of Civil War soldiers dying alone and afraid, of all the pain and suffering these ridges had ever witnessed. The sound hit me like a physical blow. My heart started beating so hard I thought it would burst. My vision went black around the edges, and I felt myself falling to my knees. This was how I was going to die, listening to the voices of the dead on Devil's Backbone Ridge. I woke up on the ground with Murphy shaking me. The fog had lifted a little and the Cherokee woman was gone. So were the other rangers. It was just me and Murphy left in the camp, and Rex had finally stopped howling. Where is everyone? I asked, sitting up. My chest still hurt from that terrible sound. Gone, Murphy said, his voice shaking. Jenkins and Parker just walked off into the fog while you were unconscious. I tried to stop them, but they looked right through me like I wasn't there. I looked around the empty camp. Our gear was scattered everywhere, and the lanterns were flickering like they were running out of fuel. But it was the silence that bothered me most. The same wrong kind of quiet I'd noticed when I first started tracking the college boys. We have to get out of here, I said. Help me pack the... Tom. Murphy grabbed my arm. Look. He was pointing at something lying on the ground near the oak tree. It was a leather bag, the kind archaeology students use to carry their tools. The bag was torn open, and its contents were spilled across the dirt. Bones. Human bones, old and yellow with age. Skull fragments with holes drilled in them. Pottery shards covered in symbols. Jewelry made from shells and copper, and scattered among it all photographs of burial mounds being dug up by flashlight. They were grave robbers, Murphy whispered. Those college boys weren't just camping. They were stealing from Cherokee burial sites. I picked up one of the photographs. It showed Michael, David, and Robert standing next to a hole they'd dug in the ground. They were smiling and holding up artifacts like trophy hunters with a dead deer. In the background, I could see the carved trees and the stone markers that meant sacred ground. "No wonder she's angry," I said. "They destroyed burial mounds that had been sealed for centuries." Murphy was looking through more photographs. "Tom, look at this one." The picture showed the three boys around their campfire on the first night. But they weren't alone. Standing just at the edge of the firelight was the shadowy figure of an old Cherokee woman. She was watching them with those same black hole eyes I'd seen. She was warning them, I realized. On the first night, she tried to warn them to stop digging and leave, but they didn't listen. So she killed them? Not killed, punished. There's a difference. I was remembering stories Billy had told me about Cherokee justice. When someone violates sacred ground, the spirits of the ancestors wake up to protect what's theirs. They don't just kill the guilty ones, they make examples of them. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. It was coming from deep in the hollow, rising up through the fog like a siren. But it wasn't mechanical. It was a human voice stretched beyond human limits, crying out in pain and rage and hunger. The death wail. Billy Hott had told me about it when we were kids, but I'd thought it was just another ghost story. Cherokee warriors were said to wail like that when they died in battle, and their spirits would keep wailing until their deaths were avenged. "Murphy, we need to leave right now." But Murphy wasn't listening. He was staring off into the fog with that same dreamy expression Jim had worn right before he walked off the cliff. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "She's calling to us. She wants to show us something." "Murphy, don't listen to her. Fight it." But he was already walking away from camp, following the sound of that terrible wailing. I grabbed his arm and tried to pull him back, but he was stronger than me, and something else was pulling him from the other direction. "Let go, Tom. She's showing me where the other boys are. She's showing me the truth about what happened here." "Murphy!" But he pulled free and disappeared into the fog. I heard his footsteps for a few seconds, then nothing. Just that awful wailing sound getting closer and closer. I was alone on Devil's Backbone Ridge with something that could kill people just by calling their names. I should have run then, should have grabbed what gear I could carry and headed for my truck. But those missing college boys were still out there somewhere, and Jim's body was at the bottom of that cliff, and now Murphy was gone too. As a ranger, I had a duty to bring them home if I could. More than that, I was starting to understand what the Cherokee woman wanted. She wasn't just angry about the grave robbing. She was trying to protect her people's sacred places from being destroyed. The boys had broken seals that had kept dangerous spirits sleeping for centuries. And now those spirits were awake and hungry. I found Billy's old medicine bag in my pack, a gift he'd given me when we were teenagers. Inside were sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco, along with a small stone carved with Cherokee symbols. Billy had told me it would protect me from angry spirits if I ever needed it. I never thought I'd need it. I lit the sage and sweetgrass and held the carved stone in my left hand. Then I walked toward the sound of the wailing, following the same path Murphy had taken. "I know you can hear me," I said to the fog. "I know what those boys did was wrong, but killing more people won't fix it. Let me help you put things right." The wailing stopped. The fog began to clear, and I could see the Cherokee woman standing about 20 yards away. She wasn't floating this time. Her feet were on the ground, and she looked more solid, more real. "You carry the sacred smoke," she said, and her voice was different now, sad instead of angry. "You speak with respect. Why do you help the defilers?" "I don't help them. I'm trying to stop more people from getting hurt." She studied me for a long moment. "Your spirit is not like theirs. You were raised by the mountains. You learned the old ways from the Cherokee boy. Billy Crow Feather. He's my friend. Billy Crow Feather is the great-grandson of my sister's son. His blood runs in your heart, even though it does not run in your veins." She was right. Billy and I had been like brothers growing up. He'd taught me to track, to read weather signs, to understand the language of birds and animals. He'd also taught me to respect the sacred places where his ancestors were buried. The young defilers broke the seals, she continued. They woke things that should sleep forever. Now the angry dead walk these mountains, and they will not rest until they have fed on living flesh. That's when I understood. The Cherokee woman wasn't the real danger. She was trying to protect people from something much worse. The college boys had disturbed burial sites that contained not just bodies, but the spirits of Cherokee warriors who had died violent deaths. Spirits that had been magically bound and sealed to keep them from harming the living. Now those seals were broken, and the warriors were thus free to hunt. How do I fix it? I asked. She smiled, and for the first time, her smile looked human. Blood must be paid for blood. The defilers must face the ancestors they disturbed. But you may choose your path. The fog swirled around us, and when it cleared, I could see them, dozens of ghostly Cherokee warriors standing among the trees. Their faces were painted for war, and their eyes burned with ancient rage. They were holding spectral weapons, tomahawks, war clubs, bows with arrows made of shadow, and walking among them, their faces blank with terror, were Michael, Robert, Murphy, Jenkins, and Parker. The college boys and my fellow rangers, all under the control of the angry dead. The Cherokee woman looked at me one last time. Choose, she said. Join them in their punishment, or leave this place and never speak of what you have seen. I looked at my friends and colleagues walking like sleepwalkers among the spirits of dead warriors. I thought about Jim at the bottom of that cliff, and David hanging in the tree, and Scout dying of fear. Then I thought about Martha and my 2 boys waiting for me at home. I chose. I walked away from Devil's Backbone Ridge that night, leaving the dead to claim their justice from those who had disturbed their rest. The Cherokee woman kept her word. The spirits didn't follow me, and by dawn, I was back at my truck. The official report said that 5 men had died in a hiking accident on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Jim Bradley fell from a cliff face during the search. The 3 college students and 2 rangers were found at the bottom of various ravines, victims of the fog and treacherous terrain. Equipment failure was blamed for the radio problems, and the unusual animal behavior was attributed to an early winter storm. Nobody questioned why all the bodies had the same expression of absolute terror on their faces. I never told the truth about what happened up there. Who would believe it? More important, the Cherokee woman had made it clear that some truths were too dangerous to share. The fewer people who knew about the sacred burial grounds on Devil's Backbone Ridge, the safer those places would remain. But she changed me, that spirit woman. When I walked away from those mountains, I brought something back with me, a sensitivity to things that most people can't see or hear. I can tell when I'm in a place where something violent happened. I can sense when spirits are restless, and sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in thick, I can hear voices calling from places where they shouldn't be. I use this gift to protect people. When hikers plan to camp in areas that feel wrong to me, I find reasons to redirect them. When children wander too close to hollow places where old things sleep, I guide them away. I've become a guardian of the boundaries between the living world and the world of the dead. Martha noticed the change in me right away. I was quieter, more serious, quicker to worry when the boys played too far from the house. She asked me what happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge, but I just told her it was a difficult search that ended badly. She didn't push for details, but sometimes I catch her watching me with concern in her eyes. My oldest boy, Tommy, started having dreams about Cherokee warriors after I came back. He'd wake up talking about painted faces and sacred grounds. I think some of what I brought back with me passed to him, the way these things sometimes do in families. I'm teaching him what Billy taught me, how to respect the old places, how to read the signs that say danger, how to walk quietly in the woods so he doesn't disturb things that should be left alone. The burial grounds on Devil's Backbone Ridge are safe now, I make sure of that. The Cherokee woman still watches over them, and the angry dead have returned to their rest. But the scars remain, in the carved trees, in the disturbed earth. and in the memories of anyone who was there that October or night. 3 years have passed since then, and I still walk those mountains every day as part of my job. But I give Devil's Backbone Ridge a wide berth, and I make sure other people do the same. The trail maps I issue to hikers always seem to have that area marked as temporarily closed for erosion control or wildlife protection zone. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the temperature drops suddenly, I hear her voice on the wind. Not calling for help like she did that night, but singing. Cherokee songs that Billy taught me when we were children. Songs about honoring the ancestors and protecting sacred ground. She's not angry anymore. She's just watching, making sure no one else makes the same mistake those college boys made. And I'm watching too, from my side of the boundary between worlds. Because some places are too sacred to disturb, and some secrets are too dangerous to tell, and some debts can only be paid in blood and silence. The mountains remember everything. The dead remember everything. And they're always listening. My name is Tom Garrett, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years now. What I told you happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in October of 1962, and every word of it is true. But if anyone asks, it was just a hiking accident. Some truths are meant to stay buried. My name is Margaret Flynn, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger here at Red River Gorge for 9 years now, and let me tell you, it wasn't easy being one of the first women to wear this uniform in Kentucky. I had to fight for every bit of respect I earned. The October morning when everything changed started like any other. The trees were showing off their fall colors, bright reds, golden yellows, and deep oranges that made the whole forest look like it was on fire. I was walking the Sky Bridge Trail, checking on the research team that had come down from the university. These college professors thought they were so smart, collecting plants for some big study. Dr. Pemberton was leading the group, a thin man with thick glasses who kept writing in a notebook. His team had been here for 3 days, taking samples of everything they could find. "Morning, Dr. Pemberton," I called out as I found them near the creek. "How's the research going?" He looked up from a patch of wild ginseng, his face pale and sweaty. "Not so good, actually. We've been having some problems." That's when I noticed the other team members. 2 graduate students sat on a fallen log, both looking sick as dogs. One girl had her head in her hands, the other was throwing up behind a tree. "What kind of problems?" I asked, walking closer. "It's the strangest thing," Dr. Pemberton said, wiping his forehead. "Every plant we touch seems to make us sick. Yesterday we collected some perfectly normal herbs, things that shouldn't hurt anyone. But within hours, we all started feeling terrible." I frowned and knelt down next to their collection bags. Inside were plants I'd seen 1,000 times. Wild mint, elderberry, even some common weeds. Nothing dangerous. "Maybe you're allergic to something?" I suggested. But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The air around the plants smelled funny. Not bad exactly, but different. Sweet at first, then bitter, like medicine. "That's what we thought," said one of the students, a young man named Kevin. "But we've all been tested for allergies. None of us should react to these plants." I picked up one of their plant guides and flipped through it. These people knew what they were doing. Dr. Pemberton had been studying plants for 20 years. "Where exactly did you collect these?" I asked. The professor pointed deeper into the woods, toward a part of the gorge most tourists never saw. "There's a small grove about half a mile that way. Beautiful spot, really. The plants there seemed bigger somehow, more healthy than anywhere else." A chill ran down my back, though I couldn't say why. I'd been all over these woods, but I'd never noticed any special grove. "I think you should pack up for today," I told them. "Get some rest. Maybe see a doctor in town." As they gathered their equipment, I noticed something odd. Their plant presses, the wooden frames used to dry specimens, kept popping open on their own. The metal clips that held them shut would suddenly spring loose, spilling the plants onto the ground. "That's been happening all morning," Kevin muttered, trying to fix his press for the 3rd time. "Brand new equipment, and it won't stay closed." I helped them carry their gear back to the parking area, but my mind kept wandering to that grove they'd mentioned. 9 years in these woods, and I'd never seen it. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. After the research team left, I decided to take a walk in that direction. The forest felt different somehow, quieter than usual. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. I found the grove without much trouble, and I had to admit the professor was right. It was beautiful. The trees formed a perfect circle around a small clearing, and the plants inside were the healthiest I'd ever seen. Everything was green and full, even with winter coming on. But something was wrong with the picture. The plants were growing in patterns that didn't make sense, perfect spirals and straight lines that nature doesn't usually make. It looked almost like someone had planted them on purpose, arranging them like a garden. In the center of the clearing stood an old oak tree, bigger around than a car. Its trunk was covered with strange marks, not random scratches, but symbols carved deep into the bark. They looked old, really old. I pulled out my camera and took some pictures, though I wasn't sure why. As I snapped the last shot, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around expecting to see a lost hiker, but there was no one there. The footsteps stopped too, like whoever it was had been walking in perfect time with me. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Nothing but silence. I decided it was time to head back, but as I walked toward the tree line, I could swear I heard something else. A woman, humming quietly, like she was working on some pleasant task. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The next morning brought bad news. Dr. Crawford, our park medic, called me at 6 a.m. "Maggie, you need to get down to the hospital," he said, his voice tight with worry. "That graduate student from yesterday, Kevin, he's in intensive care." I threw on my uniform and drove to town as fast as I could. At the hospital, Dr. Crawford met me in the hallway, his face grim. "It doesn't make sense," he said, leading me toward the ICU. "The boy's been poisoned, but not by anything we can identify. His blood work shows toxins from at least 6 different plants, but they're all plants that shouldn't be dangerous." Through the window, I could see Kevin lying unconscious, hooked up to machines. His skin had a greenish tint, and his breathing was shallow. "What do the doctors think?" I asked. "They're stumped. Some of these toxins don't even exist in nature, at least not in the combinations they're finding in his blood. It's like someone mixed the most dangerous parts of different plants together." I thought about the grove, about the strange patterns in the plants, about the footsteps I'd heard. What about the other team members? Sick, but not as bad. They're at home resting. Dr. Pemberton called this morning. He wants to come back and collect more samples. Says he needs to figure out what went wrong. "No," I said quickly. "Keep them out of the park for now, at least until we know what's happening." Dr. Crawford gave me a strange look. "You think there's something dangerous out there?" I didn't answer right away. How could I explain the feeling I'd had in that grove? How could I tell him about hearing footsteps from no one and humming from empty air? "I just think we should be careful," I said finally. That afternoon, I drove out to see Granny Whitaker. She lived in a tiny cabin about 5 miles from the park, and she knew more about local plants than anyone alive. People came from all over the county for her herbal remedies. Granny was in her 80s, with white hair braided down her back and hands that were always stained green from working with plants. She'd been born in these mountains and never left. "Maggie Flynn," she said, smiling as I knocked on her door. "Come in, child. I've been expecting you." That stopped me cold. "Expecting me?" "Sit down and have some tea," she said, bustling around her tiny kitchen. "We need to talk about Martha Crowley." I'd never heard that name before, but something about it made my skin crawl. "Who's Martha Crowley?" I asked, taking a seat at her wooden table. Granny poured hot water over some dried leaves in a cup and handed it to me. The tea smelled like the grove, sweet and bitter at the same time. "Martha was a healer," Granny said, settling into a rocking chair. "Lived in these mountains back in the 1830s. Knew more about plants, too, than anyone before or since. People came from hundreds of miles away for her help." I sipped the tea, waiting for her to continue. "But folks got scared. Granny went on, her voice dropping low. Started calling her a witch, said she made pacts with the devil, that her plants were cursed. Truth was, she was just smarter than them, and that scared them. What happened to her? Granny's eyes got sad. They killed her, dragged her out of her home one night in 1834, and hanged her from the big oak tree in her garden. Said she was poisoning people, but she never hurt a soul, only ever tried to help. The big oak tree. My blood went cold. Granny, where was Martha's garden? Same place it's always been, child. That grove where your research people got sick. Martha's been tending those plants for almost 200 years now. I set down my teacup with shaking hands. That's impossible. Martha's dead. Dead don't mean gone, Granny said simply. Especially not when someone dies angry and wronged like she did. Martha's been protecting her plants ever since. Most folks know to leave that grove alone. But why would she hurt the researchers? They weren't trying to harm anything. Granny shook her head. Martha don't trust people who come to take her plants. Too many folks over the years have tried to steal her knowledge, use her remedies for profit. She's got no way of knowing who means well and who doesn't. I drove back to the park with my head spinning. Part of me wanted to laugh at the whole thing. A ghost protecting plants. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But Kevin was lying in intensive care, and I'd heard those footsteps myself. As the sun was setting, I found myself walking back toward the grove. I told myself I was just doing my job, checking the area for safety hazards. But really, I needed to see it again. The grove looked different in the evening light. The shadows were longer, and the plants seemed to sway even though there was no wind. As I got closer to the oak tree, I smelled that same sweet, bitter scent. Then I saw her. A woman stood in the center of the clearing, bent over a patch of herbs. She wore a long dress that looked like it came from another century, and her dark hair was pinned up under a white cap. She hummed softly as she worked, the same tune I'd heard the day before. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there. Hello? I called out softly. The woman looked up, and our eyes met across the clearing. Her face was kind but tired, like someone who'd been working too long at a hard job. She smiled at me and nodded, then went back to her plants. I took a step forward, and she disappeared like smoke. But on the ground where she'd been kneeling, the herbs were freshly picked, their stems still dripping with morning dew that shouldn't have existed at sunset. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Martha's face, kind but sad, like she was carrying some terrible burden. The next morning brought worse news. Dr. Crawford called again, his voice shaking. Kevin died during the night, he said. The doctors tried everything, but the toxins just kept building up in his system. And Maggie, there's something else. My heart sank. What? Dr. Pemberton came back to the grove yesterday evening. Against your advice, against all common sense. His wife found him this morning in his hotel room. Same symptoms as Kevin, but worse. I drove straight to the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Dr. Crawford met me in the parking lot. It's not natural, Maggie, he said without preamble. I've run every test I can think of. These toxins, they don't match anything in any of our medical books. It's like the plants are creating new poisons just for these people. Where's Dr. Pemberton now? ICU, same as Kevin was. But he's conscious and he's asking for you. I found the professor hooked up too, of the same machines Kevin had been connected to. His skin had that same greenish tint, and his breathing sounded like he was drowning in his own lungs. Ranger Flynn, he whispered when he saw me. You have to stop us. Stop who? The rest of the team. They're coming back this afternoon. They think they can solve this with more samples. He grabbed my hand with surprising strength. The plants, they're alive, Maggie. Really alive. And they're angry. His grip loosened, and the machines around his bed started beeping frantically. Nurses rushed in and pushed me out of the room. I had to get to the grove before the rest of the research team did. I drove back to the park faster than I'd ever driven before, radioing ahead to tell the other rangers to watch for the university van and turn it away if they saw it. But when I got to the grove, I was too late. The van was already parked at the trailhead, and I could hear voices deeper in the woods. I grabbed my radio and ran toward the clearing. I found the two remaining graduate students, Sarah and Mike, standing at the edge of the grove with their collection equipment. But they weren't moving forward. They couldn't. A wall of thorny vines had grown up around the entire clearing, thick as a man's arm and covered with thorns as long as my fingers. The vines hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure of that. "Ranger Flynn," Sarah called out when she saw me. "We can't get through these vines. They weren't here when we scouted yesterday." Mike was walking along the thorn wall, looking for an opening. "It's impossible," he muttered. "Vines don't grow this fast, not in nature." As I watched, more vines sprouted from the ground, growing with a speed that made my eyes water. In minutes, they'd grown another 3 feet taller, and the thorns had gotten longer and sharper. "We need to leave," I said, but the students weren't listening. Sarah had pulled out some kind of cutting tool and was trying to hack through the vines. The moment her blade touched the thorns, they secreted a thick darshars, a key liquid that hissed when it hit the metal. "Don't touch that stuff," I yelled, but it was too late. Sarah had gotten some of the liquid on her hand. She screamed and dropped the tool, staring at her skin as it started to blister and turn black. I pulled out my first aid kit and poured water over her hand, but the burning just got worse. Within seconds, the skin was peeling away like old paint. "Hospital," I said, grabbing her good arm. "Now!" But as we turned to leave, Mike gave a strangled cry behind us. The vines had somehow wrapped around his ankles and were pulling him toward the thorn wall. He fell hard, his face hitting the rocky ground. I grabbed his arms and pulled as hard as I could, but the vines were stronger. They dragged him inch by inch toward the clearing, and I could see more thorns growing from them, reaching toward his body like hungry fingers. Sarah, even with her burned hand, grabbed Mike's other arm. Together we pulled until I thought my shoulders would pop out of their sockets. The vines suddenly let go, and we all fell backward in a heap. "Run!" I panted. "Run now!" We got Sarah to the hospital just in time. The doctors said the poison from the thorns was unlike anything they'd ever seen. It ate through skin and muscle like acid, but only stopped when it reached bone. Mike was shaken, but unhurt, except for some deep scratches on his ankles where the vines had grabbed him. Dr. Crawford pulled me aside while the doctors worked on Sarah. "Maggie, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I went out to the grove this morning, before the students got there. I wanted to collect some soil samples, maybe figure out what's making these plants so dangerous." "What did you find?" "Bones," he said simply. "Human bones, scattered all around that oak tree. Old ones, probably been there for decades. And something else." He pulled a small object from his pocket, a metal locket, green with age. "This was hanging from one of the branches. I think we need to find out who Martha Crowley really was." That evening, I drove back to Granny Whitaker's cabin. She was waiting for me on her porch, rocking slowly in her chair. "Found Martha's bones, did you?" she said before I could speak. I nodded and sat down on her porch steps. "Tell me the rest of the story, Granny. Tell me what really happened." Granny looked out at the darkening woods. "Martha Crowley was my great-great-grandmother's sister," she said quietly. "Family never talked about her much, but the story got passed down anyway." She stood up and went inside, coming back with an old wooden box. "Martha wasn't just a healer," Granny continued, opening the box. "She was what we used to call a plant speaker. Could make things grow just by touching them. Could understand what the plants needed to be healthy." Inside the box were old papers, yellowed with age, letters, journal pages, even some pressed flowers that still held their color. People came from all over to see her. She never charged money, just asked folks to be respectful of the land. But some people got greedy, started thinking they could steal her secrets, make money off her knowledge. Granny handed me one of the letters. It was written in faded ink, but the words were clear. Martha helps everyone who comes to her, but I fear some mean her harm. Yesterday, I saw men from town watching her garden from the woods. They carried ropes and spoke of witchcraft. I fear for her safety. The night they killed her, Granny went on, Martha cursed that grove, said her plants would protect themselves from anyone who came to steal or harm them. Most folks thought it was just the words of a dying woman, but it wasn't, I finished. No, child, it wasn't. Martha's been keeping that promise for almost 200 years now. I looked at the locket Dr. Crawford had found. Inside was a tiny picture of a woman who looked exactly like the figure I'd seen in the Grovey. If Martha Crowley was real, and she was still protecting her plants, the question was, what was I going to do about it? Dr. Crawford died that night. I got the call at 3 a.m. The hospital said he'd been found in his office, slumped over his desk. Same symptoms as the others, plant poisoning, but from toxins that shouldn't exist. On his desk was a note in his handwriting. Gone to Grove, must understand. If something happens, tell Maggie the spores were already inside me. I drove to the hospital in my pajamas and robe. The head doctor, Dr. Martinez, met me in the hallway. We don't understand it, she said, leading me to Crawford's office. Dr. Crawford never left the hospital yesterday. He was here all day working on blood samples from the other victims. But somehow, he was poisoned by the same plant toxins. I looked at Crawford's desk. He'd been working with microscope slides, studying samples from Kevin and Dr. Pemberton. But scattered around the slides were things that shouldn't have been there. Tiny mushrooms, barely visible to the naked eye, and small spores that glowed faintly in the dark. The spores, I whispered, remembering his note. They're not just in the grove. They can travel. Dr. Martinez frowned. That's impossible. Spores don't behave that way. But I was already running for my truck. If Martha's influence could reach beyond the grove, if she could send her poison anywhere she wanted, then no one was safe. I had to talk to her. The grove was different when I arrived just before dawn. The thorn wall was gone, but in its place was something worse. A garden so perfect and beautiful, it made my chest hurt to look at it. Every plant was exactly where it should be. Every flower, the perfect color. Every leaf, the right size and shape. It was like looking at a painting of paradise. Martha stood in the center of it all, tending to a patch of herbs that glowed softly in the morning light. This time, she didn't disappear when she saw me coming. "You keep coming back," she said, her voice like wind through leaves. "Even after I warned you." "You killed them," I said, my voice shaking. "Kevin, Dr. Pemberton, Dr. Crawford. They were good people." Martha straightened up and looked at me with those sad, tired eyes. "They came to steal," she said simply. "Just like all the others. They wanted to take my plants, study them, make money from them." "No, they were trying to learn, to understand." "To understand how to use them," Martha corrected. "I've seen it before, Maggie Flynn. People come with pretty words about science and learning, but they always want to take. They want to bottle my knowledge and sell it to the highest bidder." She walked closer to me, and I could see that she wasn't quite solid, more like a person-shaped shadow filled with green light. "Do you know what they did to me?" she asked. "Your good people from town? They dragged me from my home in the night, called me a witch because I could help people they couldn't, hanged me from my own oak tree while my plants watched." The air around us started to shimmer, and suddenly I could see it all. Martha's cabin, smaller than Granny's but filled with dried herbs and healing tonics. Men with torches and ropes surrounding the house. Martha being dragged, screaming toward the oak tree. "I was trying to save a child," Martha whispered. "Little boy with fever. His parents brought him to me when the town doctor gave up. I was mixing a medicine that would have saved him when they broke down my door." The vision faded, but I could still feel the echo of Martha's terror and rage. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. What they did was wrong. "But you still want to stop me," Martha said. It wasn't a question. "I want to help you," I said, taking a step forward. "But not like this. Not by killing innocent people. Martha laughed, but there was no humor in it. Innocent? They came to take my plants, just like everyone else. They would have got them up, studied them, found ways to make money from them. Nothing innocent about that. Then teach them, I said desperately. Show them the right way. You could help so many people if you worked with them instead of against them. I tried that once, Martha said, her voice getting darker. Shared my knowledge freely with anyone who asked. Look how that ended. The plants around us started to move, their stems stretching toward me like reaching hands. I could smell that sweet, bitter scent getting stronger. You're going to kill me too, aren't you? I asked. Martha tilted her head, studying me. You're different from the others. You understand the stories, respect the old ways. But you still want to bring more people here, don't you? More scientists, more people who think they know better than the plants themselves. The reaching stems were getting closer. I could see tiny thorns forming on them, and drops of that acidic poison beginning to form at their tips. What if I promised to protect this place? I said quickly. What if I made sure no one else came here to take your plants? Promises, Martha said sadly. I've heard promises before. The stems touched my arms, and I felt the first burn of the poison. But instead of fear, I felt something else, a strange connection to the plants around me. I could feel their hunger, their anger, their need to protect themselves. And I could feel Martha's loneliness. You've been alone for so long, I whispered. Martha's eyes widened, and the burning stopped. You can feel them, she said with wonder. You can hear what they're saying. I nodded, though I didn't fully understand it myself. The plants were speaking to me, not in words, but in feelings and images. They showed me seasons of growth and decay, years of being trampled by careless hikers, decades of watching people take and take without giving anything back. And they also showed me something else, how much they missed having someone who understood them, someone who could help them flourish. They need a guardian, I said, understanding finally, dawning. Someone living who can speak for them. Martha smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Now you begin to understand. She walked over to the oak tree and placed her hand on its trunk. The carved symbols glowed brighter, and I felt power flowing through the ground beneath my feet. I've been so tired, Maggie Flynn, Martha said softly. So very tired of protecting this place alone. But I couldn't rest until I knew the plants would be safe. What do you need me to do? Martha turned back to me, and I saw hope in her ghostly face. Learn from them. Listen to what they tell you. And when others come, because they will come, teach them the right way to ask for help. She walked over and took my hands in hers. Her touch was cool and tingled with plant magic. But first, she said, you must promise me something. Promise me that you'll never let anyone use these plants for profit. Never let them be studied just to be sold. They give their gifts freely, but only to those who respect them. I promise, I said, and I felt the words bind themselves to my soul with green fire. Martha smiled and began to fade away like morning mist. Then I can finally rest. As she disappeared, I felt knowledge flowing into my mind. Centuries of plant wisdom, healing recipes, the secret names of every herb in the grove. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When the last trace of Martha was gone, I stood alone in the perfect garden, with the morning sun filtering through the oak leaves and the plants whispering their secrets in my ear. I was no longer just a park ranger. I was their guardian now. 3 months later, I submitted my report to the Park Service. I called it Environmental Hazard Assessment, Red River Gorge Botanical Incident. The official story was simple. The research team had encountered a previously unknown fungal contamination in a remsivient oat grove. The area was declared off-limits to unauthorized personnel due to the presence of toxic spores that could cause severe allergic reactions. The grove was quietly reclassified as a protected research area, with access restricted to qualified personnel only, meaning me and anyone I personally approved. The families of Kevin, Dr. Pemberton, and Dr. Crawford received generous compensation from the Park Service's emergency fund. The official cause of death was listed as exposure to unknown botanical toxins. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Sarah recovered from her hand injury, though she still wears a glove to cover the scars. She never asked to come back to the Grove, and I never offered. Mike finished his degree and got a job with the Forestry Service in Oregon. He sends me a Christmas card every year, but he's never mentioned that day in the Grove. As for me, well, my life changed in ways I'm still figuring out. The plants do talk to me now, though it's not like having a conversation with a person. It's more like understanding the mood of a room when you walk into it, or knowing when a storm is coming by the way the air feels. I know when hikers have walked through the forest without respecting it. I can tell when someone has been careless with fire or litter, and I know always when someone approaches the Grove with the wrong intentions. Most people never make it past the outer ring of trees. They get turned around somehow, find themselves walking in circles until they give up and go home. The forest itself guides them away. But sometimes, someone comes with the right heart, someone who really needs help, who approaches the plants with respect and genuine need. Those people I guide to the Grove myself. Old Mrs. Henderson from town, whose arthritis was so bad she couldn't hold a coffee cup. The herbs Martha's garden provided helped her mow, more than any medicine the doctors had given her. Little Tommy Walsh, who had seizures that no hospital could control. His mother brought him to me in desperation, and the plants showed me exactly which combination of leaves and roots would give him relief. I never charge money. That was part of my promise to Martha. But people find ways to give back, helping with trail maintenance, volunteering for cleanup days, spreading the word that this forest is special and needs to be protected. I still see Martha sometimes, usually on foggy mornings or just before sunset. She doesn't speak anymore, but she nods approvingly when she sees how well I'm caring for her garden. The Park Service thinks I've become something of a local expert on botanical hazards. They send people to me when they encounter unusual plant problems in other parks. I help when I can, but I'm always careful not to reveal too much about what I can do. My official job hasn't changed. I'm still Ranger Margaret Flynn, leading nature walks and maintaining trails. But my real work happens in the quiet hours, when the tourists have gone home and the forest is left to itself. I tend the Grove, listen to what the plants need, and guard the knowledge Martha passed down to me. Sometimes, late at night when I'm walking through the woods, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been willing to listen. If I'd dismissed Martha as just a ghost story, or if I'd been too afraid to make that promise. Would she still be there, angry and alone, killing anyone who came too close to her plants? Would the Grove have died without someone to care for it? I guess I'll never know. What I do know is that there are more places like this Grove, more spirits like Martha, scattered throughout these ancient mountains. People who died protecting something they loved, who couldn't rest until they knew it would be safe. And maybe, just maybe, there are more people like me. People who can hear the old voices, who can bridge the gap between the living world and the spirits who guard it. The work isn't finished. It might never be finished. But for now, in this one small grove in the Kentucky mountains, the plants are safe, the old knowledge is preserved, and Martha Crowley can finally rest in peace. And on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the creek and the herbs whisper secrets in the breeze, I know I made the right choice, even if it means I'll never be quite the same again. My name is Margaret Flynn, and I'm the guardian of things most people don't believe in. But they're real, whether you believe or not. And they're watching. My name is Samuel Hawkins, Sam to most folks. I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 21 years, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Poachers, lost hikers, illegal dumping, drug operations, you name it. But I'd never dealt with something that wasn't quite alive. November 1971 was cold that year. The kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like cigarette smoke and turns the morning dew into ice crystals on the pine needles. I was 42 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to think I was bulletproof. My daddy had been sheriff in these parts before me, and I grew up knowing every hollow, every creek, every family that called these mountains home. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Federal agents needed help with what they called a significant moonshine operation in the Back Creek wilderness. That made me chuckle. Significant to them, maybe, but to us locals, making shine was as natural as breathing. Had been since before Prohibition, would be long after these federal boys went back to their desks in Richmond. Agent Patricia Stone was waiting for me at the ranger station when I pulled up in my truck. She was maybe 35, all business in her dark suit and shiny badge. Her partner was Agent Miller, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Ranger Hawkins? Stone extended her hand, strong grip. We appreciate the assistance. We understand you know these mountains better than anyone. I nodded. Born and raised. What exactly are we looking for? She pulled out a manila folder thick with photographs and reports. Intelligence suggests a large-scale operation somewhere in the Back Creek drainage. Multiple stills, sophisticated distribution network. We've been tracking it for months, but every time we get close, the operation seems to disappear. That got my attention. Moonshiners were clever, sure, but they couldn't just vanish. What do you mean, disappear? Miller spoke up for the first time. 3 separate raids in the past 2 months. Each time we had solid intel, fresh tracks, warm stills, evidence of recent activity. But when we moved in, he shrugged. Nothing, like they knew we were coming hours before we arrived. I studied the photographs. The still sites looked familiar. Good water, hidden locations, easy escape routes. Someone who knew these mountains was running this operation. Any idea who? Stone shook her head. That's where you come in. We need someone who knows the local families, the old hiding spots, the traditional routes. I agreed to help, though something about the whole thing felt off. In my experience, mountain people didn't run operations this sophisticated. They made their shine, sold it to trusted folks, and kept their heads down. This sounded more like organized crime than traditional moonshining. We headed out that afternoon, taking the old logging road that wound deep into Back Creek wilderness. The trees were mostly bare, their black branches reaching up like skeleton fingers against the gray sky. This time of year, you could see farther through the woods, which made it easier to spot things that didn't belong. There, Stone pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from a hollow about a mile away. That's got to be them. But as we got closer, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the woods were holding their breath. The smell hit us first. That sweet, sour scent of corn mash mixed with wood smoke. But underneath it was something else, something that made my skin crawl, like the air before a thunderstorm, all electric and heavy. We found the still in a small clearing beside a natural spring. It was a beautiful setup, copper tubing gleaming in the afternoon light, wood fire burning steady and low, everything clean and professional. But it was empty, stone cold empty, though the fire was still warm and the mash barrels were full. Fresh tracks, Miller called out, pointing to boot prints in the soft earth around the still. Can't be more than an hour old. But the tracks were wrong. They approached the still from the south, circled around it once, then just stopped. Right in the middle of the clearing, they ended. No more prints leading away, no sign of where the person had gone. Stone was examining the still itself. This is strange. The fire's burning, the mash is cooking, but there's no finished product, no jars, no storage containers, nothing. I knelt down and touched the copper tubing. It was warm, humming slightly like it was under pressure. But when I looked into the collection vessel, it was bone dry, not a drop. Agent Stone, I said slowly, I think we should head back. She looked at me like I'd suggested we abandon the investigation entirely. Why? This is our best lead yet. I couldn't explain it then. All I knew was that every instinct I'd developed in 21 years of law enforcement was screaming at me to get out of that hollow. The silence, the missing tracks, the empty but active still. None of it made sense. As we walked back to our vehicles, I found myself looking over my shoulder every few steps. The feeling of being watched was so strong I could taste it. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there but bare trees and shadows. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about those tracks that ended in the middle of nowhere. In the morning, I told myself I'd go back with Deputy Bill Turner and take another look. Maybe we'd missed something. I should have listened to my gut and stayed away. The next morning, Bill Turner met me at sunrise. Bill was a good man, local boy who'd grown up hunting these woods with his daddy. If anyone could make sense of what we'd found, it would be him. So the feds think someone's running a big operation up in Back Creek? Bill spit tobacco juice into the dirt. Hell, Sam, the Calhoun family's been making shine up there since before your daddy was born. What's the big deal? That's just it, I said as we hiked up the old deer trail. This doesn't feel like the Calhouns, too big, too sophisticated, and there's something else. I told him about the empty still, the tracks that ended nowhere, the feeling of being watched. Bill listened without saying much, but I could see him getting more serious as we walked. When we reached the clearing, the still was gone. Not dismantled, not moved, gone. The fire pit was cold and covered with leaves like it hadn't been used in years. The spring bubbled peacefully, no sign of the copper tubing or mash barrels we'd seen the day before. You sure this is the right spot? Bill asked, but his voice was tight. He could feel it too, that wrongness in the air. I walked to where I remembered the still being. The ground was undisturbed, covered with the same layer of dead leaves as the rest of the clearing. But when I knelt down and brushed the leaves away, I found something that made my blood run cold. Burn marks. Perfect circles scorched into the earth like someone had set fires in exact spots. And they were warm. Not hot, just warm, like coals that had been banked for the night. Bill, I called softly, come look at this. He knelt beside me and put his hand over one of the circles. What the hell could cause this, and why are they still warm? That's when we heard it, a low bubbling sound, like water boiling. But there was no fire, no pot, no source for the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Bill stood up fast, his hand moving instinctively to his service weapon. Sam, I don't like this. The bubbling got louder, joined by a soft dripping sound like liquid falling drop by drop into a metal container. Then came the smell. Corn mash and wood smoke, just like the day before. But the clearing was empty. Nothing there but bare trees and dead leaves. We need to go, I said. But as I turned toward the trail, I saw something that stopped me dead. Boot prints. Fresh ones, leading from the tree line to the center of the clearing. But these weren't the same prints from yesterday. These were older-style boots, the kind mountain men wore 50 years ago. Heavy leather with thick soles, laced up high. Bill saw them too. Those weren't here when we arrived. The prints circled the burn marks once, twice, then headed deeper into the woods. Against every instinct telling me to leave, I found myself following them. The trail led us through thick undergrowth to another clearing, this one smaller and more hidden. And there, sitting as pretty as you please, was the still. Same copper tubing, same mash barrels, same everything. But now it was running. Steam rose from the cooling coils. Clear liquid dripped steadily into glass jars. The fire burned low and steady, though I couldn't see anyone tending it. Someone's here, Bill whispered, drawing his weapon. Has to be. But as we watched from the tree line, something impossible happened. One of the glass jars filled up, lifted itself from the collection point, and set itself down with the others. No hands touched it. No person was anywhere near it. Bill made a strangled sound in his throat. Did you see? I saw it. We both saw it. The jar moved by itself, smooth as silk, like invisible hands were working the still. That's when the figure appeared. He stepped out from behind a large oak tree, like he'd been standing there all along, though I would have sworn the spot was empty seconds before. He was dressed in old work clothes, faded denim overalls, flannel shirt, heavy boots, a felt hat pulled low over his face. But something was wrong with him. He moved too smoothly, like he was floating just above the ground, and around the edges, where the sunlight hit him, he seemed thin. Not transparent exactly, but not solid either. He looked right at us. Even from 50 yards away, even with his hat shadowing his face, I could feel his eyes on us. Cold eyes. Dead eyes. Bill raised his weapon. "Police! Don't move!" The figure tilted his head like he was puzzled by the command. Then he smiled. At least, I think he smiled. It was hard to tell with the shadows, but something changed about his face that made my skin crawl. He raised one hand and pointed at us. Not threatening, just pointing, like he was taking our measure. Then he walked back behind the oak tree and disappeared. Not hid, disappeared. Bill and I both ran to the tree, weapons drawn, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no disturbed leaves, no sign anyone had been there at all. When we turned back to the still, it was gone again. The fire pit was cold, the clearing was empty, but on the ground where the still had been, someone had arranged 7 glass jars in a perfect circle. Each one was filled with clear moonshine, still warm from the distillation process. Bill picked up one of the jars with shaking hands. "Sam, what the hell is going on here?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we'd just seen something that shouldn't exist, and it had seen us too. As we walked back to our trucks, Bill kept looking over his shoulder. "You think it was the Calhouns? Some kind of trick to scare off the feds?" I wanted to believe that. God, how I wanted to believe that. But the Calhouns were simple mountain folk. They didn't have the knowledge or equipment to pull off something like this. And that figure, there had been something fundamentally wrong about him. That night, I called Agent Stone and told her we needed to meet. There were things about the Back Creek operation that she needed to know, things that weren't in any federal menu, or training course. But when I tried to explain what we'd seen, the words sounded crazy even to me. How do you tell a federal agent that you think you've encountered a ghost running a moonshine operation? I was about to find out. Agent Stone listened to my report with the kind of patience you show a drunk trying to explain how his car ended up in a ditch. Professional, polite, but clearly not buying a word of it. "So, you're telling me," she said slowly, "that you witnessed supernatural activity at the still site. I'm telling you what Bill and I both saw, and I'm telling you that this isn't a normal moonshine operation." She exchanged a look with Agent Miller. "Ranger Hawkins, we appreciate your local knowledge, but we need to approach this investigation with facts, not folklore." That stung, but I understood her position. If someone had told me the same story a week ago, I'd have recommended they take some time off and see a doctor. "Look," I said, "just come with me tomorrow. See for yourself. Bring whatever equipment you want, cameras, recording devices, whatever. If I'm wrong, I'll drop it." Stone considered this. "All right, but we're bringing a full team. If there really is a sophisticated operation up there, we're going to document everything properly." The next morning, we assembled at the ranger station. Stone and Miller, 2 other federal agents, Bill Turner, and me. They had enough equipment to run a small television station, cameras, recording devices, metal detectors, evidence collection kits. The hike up to Back Creek felt different this time. The other agents were talking and joking, treating it like a routine bust. But Bill and I stayed quiet, both of us feeling that familiar wrongness in the air. As we approached the first clearing, Agent Miller's metal detector started going crazy. The needle swung wildly back and forth, and the device emitted a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. "Must be interference," Miller muttered, adjusting the settings. But no matter what he did, the device wouldn't work properly. "Same thing happened to our radio yesterday," Bill said quietly. Kept picking up music, old mountain songs like from the 20s or 30s. Stone was setting up a camera on a tripod. "We'll document everything. If there are electromagnetic anomalies, we'll record them." But as soon as she turned the camera on, The image on the viewfinder started to distort. Horizontal lines ran across the picture, and the colors kept shifting from normal to sepia and back again. "Equipment malfunction," one of the other agents said. "Happens all the time in remote locations." That's when we heard the music. It came through Miller's metal detector first, a scratchy, distant sound like an old radio trying to pick up a weak signal. Then it grew stronger, clearer. Fiddle music, old-time mountain songs that my grandfather used to play on his front porch. The agents looked at each other nervously. This wasn't equipment malfunction. This was something else entirely. "Lost John came home last night, so drunk he couldn't stand. He tried to kiss his loving wife. She slapped him with her hand." The song echoed through the trees, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Stone was frantically trying to get her recording equipment to work, but every device was malfunctioning in a different way. That's when Agent Miller screamed. He was standing about 20 feet away from the rest of us, still holding his metal detector. But something was wrong with the way he was standing. Too rigid, like he was frozen in place. "Miller?" Stone called. "You all right?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. His eyes were wide with terror, staring at something behind us. We all turned around. The figure was back, standing in the exact center of the clearing. But this time he wasn't alone. There were others with him. Men in old work clothes, some wearing the remnants of what might have been federal uniforms from decades past. They stood in a rough circle around us, perfectly still, perfectly silent. And they were all see-through. Not completely transparent, but like looking at someone through heavy fog. You could see them clearly, but you could also see the trees behind them, the ground beneath their feet. The one in the center, the one in overalls, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from inside my head rather than through my ears. "This here's Calhoun land. Always has been. You federals best move along." Stone had found her voice. "This is United States government property. You're trespassing on federal land." The figure laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Federal land? Boy, I was making shine in this hollow before there was a federal anything, before your grandpappy was even born." "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Name's Ezra Calhoun. This here's my still, my operation, my hollow, and you folks are starting to annoy me." Miller suddenly collapsed, gasping for air like he'd been held underwater. The metal detector in his hands was red hot, smoke rising from the plastic housing. "We need to leave," I said urgently. "Now!" But Stone was still trying to be a federal agent. "You're under arrest for operating an illegal distillery on federal property." Ezra Calhoun tilted his head back and laughed again. "Arrest me? Lady, I've been dead since 1967. What you gonna do, shoot me?" That's when things got really bad. The air around us started to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The smell of alcohol grew so strong it made my eyes water. And all around the clearing, fires began to spring up. Small flames at first, then larger, dancing without fuel or visible source. One of the other agents drew his weapon. "I don't care what you are. You're interfering with a federal investigation." He fired 3 shots directly at Ezra Calhoun. The bullets passed right through him and buried themselves in an oak tree. Ezra didn't even flinch. But the other figures, his ghostly companions, they started moving toward us. "Run!" I shouted. "Everyone run!" We scattered like quail, crashing through the underbrush toward the trail. Behind us, I could hear Ezra's laughter mixing with the sound of flames crackling and old music playing. Bill was right beside me as we ran. "Sam, what the hell was that?" "Dead people," I panted. "Dead moonshiners who don't know they're dead." We made it back to the vehicles, but when we counted heads, we came up one short. Agent Stone was missing. We searched for Stone until well past dark, calling her name, retracing our steps, checking every hollow within a mile radius. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. "We have to call in backup," Miller said, his hands still shaking from whatever had happened to him at the clearing. "Federal search and rescue, state police, everyone." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. Give me one more night. I know these mountains, and I know who we're dealing with now." That evening, I drove to the county library in town and pulled out the old newspaper archives. If Ezra Calhoun had died in 1967, there would be a record of it. And if I was going to get Agent Stone back alive, I needed to understand what we were up against. I found the story on page 3 of the October 15, 1967 edition of the Jefferson County Herald, Local Man Killed in Federal Raid. Ezra Calhoun, 34, was shot and killed yesterday during a federal raid on an illegal distillery operation in the Back Creek Wilderness. Calhoun, the last member of a family that had operated moonshine stills in the area since the 1880s, reportedly fired on federal agents attempting to destroy his equipment. He was killed when agents returned fire. It was a tragic end to a family tradition, said Sheriff William Hawkins. The Calhouns never caused trouble for anybody. They just made their shine and minded their in business. But times are changing, and the federal boys don't see it that way. Calhoun's body was recovered, but his still was never located despite extensive searches. Federal agents believe the operation was more sophisticated than initially thought, possibly involving multiple sites and an extensive distribution network. Calhoun is survived by no immediate family. He was the last of his line. The last of his line. No wonder his spirit was still tied to that hollow. He'd died protecting the only thing he had left, his family's legacy. But knowing why he was there didn't solve the problem of Agent Stone. If Ezra had taken her, she was probably in his main still, the one the feds never found back in 1967. I spent the rest of the night studying topographical maps, looking for locations that fit the profile. Hidden hollows with good water sources, defensible positions, places where a man could hide a sophisticated operation for decades. Just before dawn, I found it. A narrow canyon about 2 miles deeper into the wilderness, accessible only by an old logging road that had been closed since the 1950s. There was a natural spring marked on the map, and the terrain would hide smoke and sound from casual observation. I left Bill at the ranger station with instructions to call for backup if I wasn't back by noon. Then I loaded my truck with rope, flashlights, and my grandfather's old hunting rifle, the one he'd used to put food on the table during the Depression. The logging road was barely passable, overgrown with decades of neglect. I had to walk the last half mile, following what might have been a deer trail through thick undergrowth. The canyon was exactly where the map said it would be. And at the bottom, hidden in a grove of old-growth pines, was the most sophisticated moonshine operation I'd ever seen. It wasn't just one still. It was a whole complex. Multiple copper stills connected by an intricate network of pipes and cooling coils, storage tanks, fermentation vats, even what looked like a small laboratory for testing alcohol content. All of it maintained in perfect condition despite being hidden in the wilderness for 50-plus years. And standing in the middle of it all, clear as day in the morning light, was Ezra Calhoun. He looked different here, more solid, more real. This was his place, his power source. Here he wasn't just a ghost haunting the woods. He was the master of his domain. Wondered when you'd figure it out, he said, his voice carrying easily across the canyon. You're smarter than the rest of them federals. Got some mountain sense in you. Where is she? He gestured toward a small cabin built into the canyon wall. Safe enough. For now. But she's been asking too many questions, poking around where she don't belong. I could see Agent Stone through the cabin's single window. She was sitting in a chair, apparently unharmed but clearly unable to leave. Let her go, Ezra. Your fight's not with her. He laughed, that dry leaf sound I was getting tired of hearing. My fight's with anyone who wants to shut down what my family built. You know how long the Calhoun's been making shine in these mountains? Since the 1880s, according to the newspaper. Before that, my great-granddaddy started the first, still in 1847. 6 generations of Calhouns learned the trade in this very hollow. And now I'm the last one, thanks to your federal friends. I understood his anger, but I also understood that he was past reasoning with. Death had frozen him in 1967, and all the rage and hurt from that day was still burning in him like an eternal flame. "The world's changed, Ezra. Prohibition's been over for 30 years. People don't need illegal shine anymore." His eyes flashed with fury. "Don't need it? Boy, you don't understand nothing. This ain't just about selling liquor. This is about family. This is about tradition. This is about not letting the government tell mountain people how to live," the air wrote. And us began to shimmer again, and I could feel the temperature dropping. Every still in the canyon started bubbling at once, steam rising from dozens of copper coils. The sound was deafening. "I'm not giving up what's mine," Ezra shouted over the noise. "Not for you, not for her, not for nobody." That's when I noticed the other figures appearing around the canyon rim. More dead moonshiners, more victims of federal raids over the decades. They were surrounding us, cutting off any escape route. And then I smelled something that made my blood turn to ice. Gasoline. Ezra was pouring alcohol over everything. The stills, the cabin, the wooden walkways between the equipment. Not moonshine, but raw ethanol, the kind that burns hot and fast and doesn't leave much behind. "If I can't have my operation," he said, striking a match, "then nobody can." The match fell. Fire erupted across the canyon floor like a living thing, racing along the alcohol trails, climbing the wooden structures, turning Ezra's hidden paradise into an inferno. But this wasn't normal fire. It burned blue and green and white, colors that fire shouldn't be, fed by supernatural rage as much as by fuel. I ran for the cabin, but a wall of flame sprang up in front of me. The heat was so intense it singed my eyebrows from 10 feet away. "Stone!" I shouted. "Can you hear me?" Her voice came back, faint but clear. "I'm okay, but I can't get out." The fire was spreading fast. Too fast. In minutes, the whole canyon would be a furnace. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Ezra Calhoun was laughing. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me about dealing with mountain spirits. You don't fight them. You respect them. You acknowledge their claim and find a way to honor it. "Ezra!" I called out over the roar of the flames. "I want to make a deal." The laughter stopped. The fire kept burning, but it stopped spreading. "What kind of deal?" His voice came from everywhere at once. "You let the agent go, and I promise the feds won't bother your family stills anymore. Not the old on. That's not the traditional operations. Just the big commercial stuff they're really after." Silence. The fire crackled and hissed, but Ezra didn't answer right away. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "Because I'm mountain-born just like you. My daddy was sheriff, my granddaddy before him. We understand how things work up here." More silence. Then, slowly, the wall of fire in front of the cabin began to part. "Get her out," Ezra said finally. "But remember our deal, Sam Hawkins. You break it, and I'll come for you both." I ran through the gap in the flames and kicked open the cabin door. Stone was tied to the chair, but otherwise unharmed. I cut her bonds with my pocket knife and helped her to her feet. "How did you—" she started to ask. "I'll explain later. Right now, we run." We made it out of the canyon just as the whole complex went up in a massive explosion that shook the ground beneath our feet. When we looked back, there was nothing left but a smoking crater and the lingering smell of corn mash and brimstone. The official report listed the incident as an accidental explosion of an illegal distillery operation. Agent Stone backed up my story about finding the complex abandoned and determining it was too dangerous to approach safely. She never asked me how I knew where to find her, and I never volunteered the information. Some things are better left unexplained, especially in federal reports. The Back Creek investigation was quietly closed. The feds declared the moonshine operation destroyed and moved on to other priorities. Miller got transferred to a desk job in Richmond, said he needed a change of scenery. Bill Turner and I never talked about what we'd seen in those clearings. Mountain people have a tradition of keeping certain things to themselves, and this was definitely one of those things. But I kept my end of the bargain. Over the next few years, whenever federal agents came around asking about moonshine operations, I'd steer them toward the commercial stuff. The big operations run by outsiders trying to make easy money. The traditional family stills, the ones that had been running for generations, I'd somehow never quite get around to mentioning. And the funny thing was, after that day in the canyon, I developed a new skill. I could smell moonshine from a mile away. Not just the obvious sense of mash and wood smoke, but something deeper. Something that let me know whether a still was being run by family people or by criminals. It was like Ezra had left me a gift, or maybe a responsibility. 3 months after the incident, I was hiking through a different part of the forest when I caught that familiar scent. I followed it to a small clearing where an old man was tending a traditional copper still. When he saw me coming, his hand moved toward a shotgun leaning against a nearby tree. "Easy there," I said, holding up my hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble." He studied me for a long moment. "You're that ranger, the one who made the deal with Ezra." Word travels fast in the mountains, especially word about supernatural encounters. I wasn't surprised he'd heard. "That's right, and the deal still stands, as long as you're not selling to kids or running a commercial operation." He nodded slowly. "Just making enough for family and friends, same as my daddy and his daddy before him." "Then we don't have a problem." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Ranger, you see Ezra again? You tell him the Mullinses appreciate what he done. Some traditions are worth protecting." I never did see Ezra Calhoun again, at least not directly. But sometimes, hiking through the deeper parts of Back Creek Wilderness, I'll catch a whiff of corn mash on the wind or hear the distant sound of fiddle music echoing through the trees. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'll find a jar of clear mountain moonshine sitting on a stump beside the trail. Always good quality, always smooth as silk, with no note or explanation. And I figure it's Ezra's way of saying the deal's still good. My name is Samuel Hawkins, and I've been a ranger for 21 years. I've learned that some laws aren't written in books, and some problems can't be solved with handcuffs or federal task forces. Sometimes the best law enforcement is knowing when not to enforce the law at all. The mountains keep their own justice, and the dead protect their own traditions. And as long as I remember that, I figure Ezra Calhoun and I will get along just fine, even if one of us isn't quite alive anymore. My name is David Patterson, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their jobs. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in March of 1965 in those caves under Brasstown Bald. I used to be a coal miner back in Pennsylvania. Spent my early 20s underground, breathing coal dust and listening to the mountain groan above my head. When I moved to Georgia for cleaner air and a fresh start, I thought I'd left the darkness behind. Turns out, the darkness followed me. Cave rescue was my specialty. 16 years of pulling folks out of tight spots, teaching safety to weekend explorers, and mapping the endless tunnels that wind through these mountains. I knew every cave system in the Chattahoochee National Forest like my own backyard. At least I thought I did. The Cherokee used to say these caves were sacred. During the Civil War, soldiers hid in them. Early miners explored them looking for gold and silver. But there were always stories, whispers about sounds that came from deep places, about people who went in and never came out quite the same. I used to laugh at those stories. Underground monsters were minor folklore, I'd tell people, just scared men in dark places letting their minds play tricks. That was before I met one face to face. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. Alice Cooper from the ranger station, not the singer, just a medic with the same name, told me we had a problem. 6 college kids from the University of Georgia had gone spelunking in the Brasstown Bald Cave system. They were supposed to be back by Sunday night. It was now Tuesday, and nobody had heard from them. "Probably just lost track of time," I told Alice as I gathered my gear. "College kids, you know how they are." But something felt wrong from the start. The weather had been bad. Heavy rains for 3 days straight. Cave systems flood fast when the water table rises. Smart explorers know to stay out during rain season. I met Dr. Martinez at the cave entrance. He was a geologist from the university, about 50 years old, with thick glasses and hands that shook when he was nervous. His hands were shaking that morning. "Dave, I've been studying these caves for 20 years, he said, pointing at the dark opening in the mountainside. "This entrance leads to the main chamber system. But look at this." He showed me scratches in the granite around the cave mouth, deep gouges like something with massive claws had been trying to get in, or get out. "What could make marks like that?" Dr. Martinez asked. I ran my fingers along the scratches. They were fresh, maybe a few days old, and they went deep into solid rock, deeper than any tool I knew could cut. "Probably just erosion," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. "Let's get our gear and head in." Alice joined us with the medical kit and extra rope. She was tough, had to be, working rescue in these mountains. But I saw her glance at those claw marks and frown. We checked our equipment twice: carbide lamps, climbing ropes, pythons for the steep sections, first aid supplies. I had maps of the cave system rolled up in a waterproof tube. The main chamber went back about half a mile with 3 side passages we'd mapped. Beyond that, the caves got too dangerous for regular exploration. "Stay close, Tom," I told them as we entered the cave. "These passages can be tricky, and with all this rain, we might hit flooded sections." The first thing I noticed was the silence. Cave silence is different from regular quiet. It's thick, heavy silence that presses against your eardrums like deep water. But this was wrong somehow. The echoes weren't right. When Alice coughed, the sound bounced back from places that couldn't exist. 20 yards in, I stopped. There was a smell, musty and animal, but mixed with something else. Decay. Old decay. Like something had been dead down here for a very long time. "You smell that?" I asked. Dr. Martinez nodded. "Animal den, maybe? Bears sometimes use caves." But I'd been in bear caves before. This was different. This was the smell of something that had been hunting and feeding in the same place for years. We found the first piece of student equipment 30 yards deeper. A backpack, torn open and empty. The straps looked like they'd been cut, but the edges were too rough for a knife, more like they'd been chewed. "Maybe they had to dump weight in a hurry," Alice suggested. I wanted to believe that, but the backpack was sitting right in the middle of the passage, like someone had placed it there on purpose, like bait. We followed the main passage deeper into the mountain. Our lights cut through the darkness, but somehow the dark seemed to push back. I'd been in hundreds of caves, but this felt different. The shadows moved wrong. Dr. Martinez stopped to examine the cave walls. "Dave, look at this. These formations. They're not on any of our surveys." He was right. The passage was wider than it should be, and there were side tunnels branching off that weren't on my maps. Tunnels that went down at steep angles, disappearing into blackness that our lights couldn't touch. "The flooding must have opened new sections," I said. But that didn't make sense either. It takes thousands of years for water to carve new caves. We found more equipment as we went deeper. A sleeping bag, shredded to pieces. A flashlight with the lens cracked and the batteries missing. A camera, smashed against the cave wall with such force that pieces were embedded in the rock. Alice picked up something from the cave floor and held it up to her light. It was a boot. Just one boot, with the laces still tied. "Where's the foot that was in it?" she whispered. I took the boot and examined it. The leather was torn in 5 parallel lines like massive claws had, ripped right through it. There was something dark staining the inside, something that looked like dried blood. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from deep in the cave, echoing up through passages we couldn't see. A human scream, full of terror and pain. But it lasted too long, longer than human lungs could manage. And when it finally stopped, we heard another one, then another. "The students," Alice said. "They're still alive." We moved faster, following the screams deeper into the cave system. But the sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off walls and playing tricks with our ears. Sometimes they sounded close, sometimes far away. Dr. Martinez was studying his compass and cursing under his breath. "This doesn't make sense. We should be heading north, but the compass says we're going southeast. That would put us under the lake. Compasses don't work right underground, I told him. Too much iron in the rock. But I was checking my own compass, and it was spinning slowly, like it couldn't find magnetic north. In 16 years of cave work, I'd never seen that happen. The passage opened into a large chamber I'd never seen before. Our lights couldn't find the ceiling or the far walls. It was huge, big enough to hold a church, and it was wrong. The walls were covered with paintings. Not Cherokee paintings. I knew what those looked like. These were older, cruder. They showed stick figures of people being hunted by something else, something with long arms and big eyes and claws like knives. My God, Dr. Martinez whispered. These could be prehistoric, cave paintings from before recorded history. But I was looking at something else. In the center of the chamber, someone had built a pile of bones, human bones picked clean and white, arm bones and leg bones and skulls with their eye sockets staring at nothing. Some of the bones looked old, but others still had bits of cloth clinging to them. Alice grabbed my arm. Dave, look. She was pointing at the bone pile. On top, arranged like a crown, were 6 college ID cards. We'd found the students, or what was left of them. Dr. Martinez was taking pictures of the cave paintings, his camera flash lighting up the chamber in quick, bright bursts. Each flash showed us more details we didn't want to see, more bones, more paintings of people being torn apart. And something else, movement in the shadows at the edge of our lights. Did you see that? Alice asked. I turned my lamp toward where she was looking, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and the sound of water dripping somewhere far above us. Then Dr. Martinez screamed. Something had grabbed him from behind and was dragging him toward one of the side passages. In the wild beam of his flashlight, I caught a glimpse of what had him. It was pale white, like something that had never seen sunlight. It had long arms and longer fingers that ended in black claws, and its eyes. Its eyes were huge and reflected our lights like an animal's. "Help me!" Dr. Martinez shouted, clawing at the cave floor as the thing pulled him into the darkness. I lunged forward with my rope, but I was too late. The thing dragged him into a passage too narrow for us to follow. We could hear him screaming for what felt like hours, his voice echoing through the cave system, getting weaker and weaker, until finally there was silence. Alice was hyperventilating. What was that thing? What was it? I didn't answer because I didn't know. In 16 years of cave work, in all my time underground as a miner, I'd never seen anything like it. But I knew one thing. We had to get out of there. I checked my watch. We'd been underground for 3 hours, but it felt like days. Time moves different in caves, but not like this. The darkness was playing with our minds. We're leaving, I told Alice. Right now. But when I turned back toward the passage we'd come from, it wasn't there. The passage we'd used to enter the chamber was gone. And where it should have been was solid rock wall, like it had never existed. Alice ran her hands over the stone, looking for any crack or opening. I checked my maps, but they were useless now. Nothing matched what we were seeing. The chamber we were in didn't exist on paper, and the passages leading out went in directions that couldn't be right. There were 5 openings leading deeper into the cave system, 5 dark mouths that seemed to swallow our lights. One of them had taken Dr. Martinez. The others could lead anywhere. We pick one and follow it, I told Alice. Eventually, all caves connect to the surface. But I wasn't sure that was true anymore. These caves felt different, like they followed rules that had nothing to do with geology or nature. We chose the largest passage and started walking. Our footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes sounding like there were more than 2 people walking. Sometimes it sounded like we were being followed. The passage sloped downward at a steep angle. Water ran along the floor, not the clear stream water you usually find in caves, but something dark and thick that stained the rocks. It smelled like metal and decay. Alice slipped on the wet rocks and scraped her hand. When she held it up to the light, we both saw that the water had turned her blood black. "What kind of water does that?" she asked. I didn't know, but I was starting to understand that these caves weren't natural. Something had changed them, shaped them for its own purposes. The bone pile back in the chamber wasn't random. It was a collection, a trophy room. We heard sounds ahead of us, scratching and scraping, like claws on stone. I signaled Alice to be quiet, and we moved forward carefully, our lights dimmed. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but still huge, and it wasn't empty. The thing that had taken Dr. Martinez was there, crouched, head over something on the cave floor. In our dim light, we could see it clearly for the first time. It had once been human, maybe long ago. But living in the caves had changed it. Its skin was white like bone, stretched tight over muscles that were too long and too strong. Its fingers had grown into claws, and its eyes had gotten huge to see in the darkness. When it opened its mouth, we saw teeth like broken glass. What it was crouched over used to be Dr. Martinez. The thing looked up at our lights and made a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a howl. It was the sound of something that had forgotten it used to be human. Alice grabbed my arm so tight I thought she'd break it. "Oh God, Dave. Oh God, what is that?" The creature stood up slowly. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and it moved like water, smooth and fast. It took a step toward us, then another. That's when I remembered the blasting caps in my gear bag. I always carried them for emergency cave-ins, small charges that could clear blocked passages. I'd never used them as weapons before. "Back up slowly," I told Alice. "Don't run. Don't make any sudden moves." But the creature was faster than us. It leaped across the chamber in one jump, landing between us and the passage we'd come from. Up close, the smell was overwhelming. Death and decay and something else. Something wild and angry. It opened its mouth and made that sound again, but louder this time. The sound hurt our ears and made the cave walls shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance we heard the rumble of a cave-in. "The whole system is unstable," I shouted over the noise. "One wrong move and we'll be buried alive." The creature circled us like a predator, staying just at the edge of our lights. It was smart, smarter than an animal. It knew we were trapped, and it was taking its time. Alice was crying now, but she was still standing. "Dave, I don't want to die down here. I don't want to end up like Dr. Martinez." "You won't," I promised her, but I wasn't sure how I was going to keep that promise. The creature made another one of those sounds, and this time we heard an answer from somewhere else in the caves. Then another answer, and another. There wasn't just one of these things. There was a whole family of them, living deep in the cave system, hunting anything that came down here. The students had been food. Dr. Martinez had been food. And now, it was our turn. I pulled out the blasting caps and showed them to Alice. "These might give us a chance, but we have to time it right." The creature seemed to understand what I was holding. It hissed and backed away from us, but it didn't leave. It was waiting for the others to arrive. We could hear them coming now, the scratch of claws on stone, getting closer. How many were there? 5? 10? More? "When I say run," I told Alice, "you run for that passage on the left. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just run." "What about you?" "I'm going to bring this whole chamber down on them." The first one appeared at the mouth of a side passage, another pale, twisted thing that had once been human. Then another. They were surrounding us, cutting off our escape routes one by one. I armed the blasting caps and threw them toward the largest group of creatures. They scattered, but not far enough. "Run!" I shouted. The explosion lit up the chamber like daylight for just a second. In that flash, I saw everything. Dozens of creatures, some running away from the blast, others running toward us. The cave ceiling cracking and starting to fall. And Alice, already halfway to the passage, moving faster than I'd ever seen anyone move. I ran after her as the chamber collapsed behind us. The blast had worked better than I'd hoped. Half the chamber had caved in, and we could hear the creatures on the other side howling and clawing at the rocks. But we weren't safe yet. The explosion had weakened the whole cave system, and water was pouring in from somewhere above us. Alice and I ran through passages that seemed to change as we moved through them. Sometimes the ceiling was high enough to stand up straight. Sometimes we had to crawl on our hands and knees. The water was getting deeper and it was rising fast. "We're going to drown down here," Alice gasped. No, we're not, I said, but I wasn't sure anymore. The water was up to our waists and still rising. Soon it would reach the ceiling, and we'd be trapped in an air pocket with nowhere to go. That's when we found the way out. It wasn't a passage. It was a shaft that went straight up like a natural chimney. Water was pouring down it, which meant it connected to the surface. But it was narrow, maybe 3 feet across, and the walls were slick with moisture. Can you climb? I asked Alice. She looked up into the darkness above us. Do I have a choice? I went first, using the cave climbing techniques I'd learned in my early ranger days. The walls were rough enough to give handholds, but they were wet and crumbly. One wrong move and we'd fall back into the rising water. Halfway up, I heard something that made my blood freeze, the sound of claws on stone coming from below us. One of the creatures had found a way around the cave-in and was following us up the shaft. Climb faster, I told Alice. I looked down and saw it in the beam of my headlamp, a pale shape moving up the shaft below us, climbing the walls like a spider. It was faster than us, and it was gaining ground. But then I saw something else. Daylight. Real daylight. Not the artificial glow of our lamps. We were close to the surface. I can see the top, I shouted to Alice. 20 more feet. The creature below us made that screaming sound again, and the whole shaft shook. More rocks fell, and I felt one hit my shoulder hard enough to make me lose my grip for a second. Alice reached the top first and scrambled out into daylight. I was right behind her, pulling myself up through an opening that was barely wide enough for my shoulders. We were on the mountainside, maybe half a mile, from where we'd entered the cave. The opening we'd climbed through was hidden behind thick bushes. No wonder nobody had ever found it before. But we weren't safe yet. I could hear the creature in the shaft below us, still climbing. In a few seconds it would reach the surface. I still had one blasting cap left. Get back, I told Alice, and I dropped the cap down the shaft. The explosion was smaller this time, but it was enough. The shaft collapsed, sealing the opening with tons of rock and earth. Whatever was down there would stay down there. We sat on the mountainside in the sunshine, breathing clean air and trying to understand what had happened to us. Alice was shaking, and I realized I was too. What were those things? She asked. I thought about the cave paintings, the bone pile, the way the creatures had moved and hunted. I think they used to be people, I said. People who went into the caves and got lost. The darkness changed them, made them into something else. How long have they been down there? Long time, maybe centuries. The Cherokee probably knew about them. That's why they said the caves were sacred. They were trying to keep people away. Alice looked back at the sealed opening. What if there are other ways out? Then we make sure nobody else goes down there. We hiked back to the main cave entrance and found the ranger station crew waiting for us. They'd been searching for 3 hours after we missed our check-in time. I told them we'd found evidence that the students were dead, killed in a cave-in. It wasn't exactly a lie. I recommended that the entire cave system be sealed permanently, for safety reasons. 2 days later, a crew from the county brought enough dynamite to bring down the main entrance. They sealed it so thoroughly that it would take major excavation to open it again. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, peoples. In town say they can hear sounds coming from under the mountain. Scratching sounds, digging sounds, like something down there is trying to find another way out. That was 40 years ago, and I still wake up some nights hearing those sounds. The screaming, the scratching of claws on stone, the sound of something that used to be human, but forgot how. I never went into another cave after that day. Couldn't do it. Just thinking about being underground again would make my hands shake and my breathing get short. The Ranger Service transferred me to surface duties, trail maintenance, visitor education, fire watch, work that kept me in the sunlight. Alice left the Ranger Service entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved to Kansas, about as far from caves as you can get. We stayed in touch for a few years, but talking about it just brought back the memories. Some things are better left buried. The official report said that 6 college students died in a cave-in during the heavy rains of March 1965. Dr. Martinez was listed as a rescue worker who died trying to save them. The cave system was sealed for public safety after geological surveys showed it was unstable. But I kept the photographs Dr. Martinez had taken before he died. The pictures of those cave paintings showing creatures that looked exactly like what we'd seen. Pictures of bone piles that went back generations. Evidence that something had been living in those caves for a very long time, feeding on anyone unlucky enough to wander into their territory. I never showed those pictures to anyone. Who would believe them? And what good would it do? The caves were sealed. The things inside were trapped. That had to be enough. Except sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. 3 years after we sealed the caves, a hiker found some strange scratches on trees near Brasstown Bald. Deep gouges in the bark, like something with massive claws had been sharpening them. The scratches were 8 feet off the ground. 5 years after that, a family camping in the area reported hearing screaming sounds in the middle of the night. Sounds that seemed to come from underground. When the rangers investigated, they found small holes in the ground near the campsite. Holes that looked like they'd been dug from below. I always told myself it was nothing. Animals, wind in the rocks, people's imaginations running wild after hearing stories about the sealed caves. But deep down, I knew better. Those things had lived in the darkness for centuries, maybe longer. They'd adapted to life underground, grown strong in the deep places where sunlight never reached. They were patient, they were smart, and they were hungry. Sealing one entrance wouldn't stop them forever. If they wanted out bad enough, they'd find a way. They'd dig new tunnels, open new passages, find other ways to reach the surface. And when they did, they'd be looking for food. I'm retired now, living in a little house in town, as far from the mountains as I can get without leaving Georgia entirely. But I still keep my old ranger gear in the basement, ropes, lamps, blasting caps, just in case. Because sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling down from Brasstown Bald, I hear sounds that shouldn't exist. Scratching sounds from under the ground, digging sounds that seem to get a little closer every year. And I know that someday, those things are going to break through. When that happens, someone's going to have to go back down into the darkness and face them again. Someone who knows what they're dealing with, someone who's seen them before and lived to tell about it. I just hope I'm ready when that day comes. My name is David Patterson, and I've been keeping watch for 40 years. Some caves rescue back. My name is Catherine McLeod, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a ranger for 8 years now, and at 26, I'm the youngest female supervisor in this whole region. People think that's something special, but they don't know what I know about these mountains. I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old country, Scotland, where our family came from. She'd tell me about spirits that lived in the Highland peaks, creatures made of mist and wind that could drive a person mad with fear. Just stories, I always told her. Just old tales to scare children. I wish I'd listened better. February 1978 was the worst winter we'd seen in years. Ice storms came down from the north like angry ghosts, and the wind on Grandfather Mountain could knock a grown man flat. That's where I work. The highest peak around here, all granite faces and dangerous drops. Most people stay away when the weather turns bad, but some folks think they're tougher than Mother Nature. They're usually wrong. I was checking equipment in the ranger station when the emergency call came in. Static filled the radio, then Jack Morrison's voice cut through. "Kate, we got climbers stuck up on the north face. Ice storm came out of nowhere. They're trapped." Jack was our best medic, steady as a rock. If he sounded worried, things were bad. "How many?" I asked, pulling on my gear. 3. College kids from Charlotte. Been up there since yesterday morning. I looked out the window. The storm hadn't been in any weather report I'd seen. Clear skies were supposed to last all week, but the mountain was covered in thick gray clouds that seemed to move wrong, too fast, too low, swirling like they had a mind of their own. "Pete's already heading up," Jack continued. Pete Williams was our climbing expert, knew every route on the mountain better than anyone. I grabbed my ice axe and crampons. "I'll meet you out at base camp in 20 minutes. The drive up was strange. My truck's heater worked fine, but I felt cold anyway. The kind of cold that gets in your bones and won't leave. The radio kept cutting out, filled with sounds that almost sounded like voices, whispers in a language I didn't know. At base camp, Pete was already suited up. He looked nervous, which wasn't like him. Pete had climbed mountains all over the world. Nothing usually bothered him. "Something's not right up there," he said, nodding toward the peak. "Winds coming from all directions at once. That doesn't happen." I studied the mountain through my binoculars. The storm clouds hung around the summit like a thick, gray blanket. Every few seconds, I thought I saw something moving in the mist, a shape too big to be human, too fast to be real. "Could be a trick of the light," I said, but I didn't believe it. Jack arrived with the medical gear. He was sweating despite the cold. Tried to radio the climbers again, got nothing but screaming. Then the line went dead. We started up the mountain at 2 p.m. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind kept changing direction. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "The mountains remember Katie. They remember who came before, and they don't always welcome strangers." By 3 p.m., we were 1,000 feet up. That's when we found the first body. The climber was sitting against a rock, perfectly upright. His eyes were wide open, staring at something we couldn't see. No blood, no broken bones. But his face was frozen in pure terror. "Heart attack," Jack said after checking him over. "But look at this." He pointed to the man's hands. The fingers were clenched so tight around his ice axe that we couldn't pry them loose. The metal was bent, actually bent, like he'd tried to crush it. "No way someone has that kind of grip strength," Pete muttered. I knelt down next, to the body. The young man couldn't have been older than 20. What had scared him so badly that his heart just stopped? "We need to find the other two," I said, but my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. We kept climbing. The storm got worse with every step. Snow whipped around us so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. But it wasn't normal snow. It felt warm against my skin, and it smelled like something I remembered from childhood. Heather flowers. But heather doesn't grow on these mountains. "Kate!" Pete called out. He was pointing up the rock face. "Look at that!" About 50 feet above us, something gray was moving along a vertical wall of granite. It moved like water, flowing over the rock without making a sound. For a second it looked almost human, tall and thin, with long arms that stretched too far. Then it was gone. "Did you see that?" Pete asked. "Ice formation," I said. "Sometimes they look like moving shapes. But ice doesn't move that fast, and ice doesn't leave footprints. Because that's what we found next. Footprints in the snow that were too long to be human, with gaps between the toes like claws. They led straight up the mountain, disappearing into the mist. We followed them. The second body was hanging from a rope 20 feet off the ground. The rope hadn't broken. He'd climbed up there himself, then just stopped. His climbing gear was scattered below him like he'd thrown it away. "This doesn't make sense," Jack said. "Why would he climb up there and just hang himself?" I studied the area around the rope. More of those strange footprints circled the base of the cliff, and carved into the rock next to them were symbols, old symbols that looked like the ones in my grandmother's prayer book, Highland Gaelic. But who would carve Highland symbols on a North Carolina mountain? The wind picked up again, and for a moment I could swear I heard bagpipes playing somewhere high above us. Pete heard it too. I could see it in his face. "We need to find the third climber and get out of here," he said. But when we tried to head back down, we couldn't find our route. The familiar trail markers were gone. The rocks looked different. It was like the mountain had changed around us while we weren't looking. "Which way did we come from?" Jack asked. I turned in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same. Gray rock, swirling snow, and those footprints leading deeper into the mist. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from above us, echoing off the canyon walls. A young woman's voice, terrified and desperate. The third climber was still alive. "Up there!" Pete pointed toward a narrow ledge about 200 feet above our heads. "I can make that climb." "Not alone," I said. "We stick together." But as we started climbing, the mountain seemed to fight us. Handholds crumbled when we grabbed them. Ice formed on the rock faster than should be possible. My equipment kept malfunctioning. The rope got tangled, my ice axe slipped from my grip twice, and my radio started making that whispering sound again. Halfway up, Pete stopped climbing. "Kate," he said in a voice I'd never heard from him before. "Kate, there's something behind you." I looked over my shoulder. The gray thing was back, but this time it was close enough to see clearly. It looked like a man made of mist and shadow, at least 8 feet tall. Its eyes were holes in its head, darker than the storm clouds. When it opened its mouth, cold air rushed out like winter wind, and it was reaching for me. I pressed myself against the rock face as the gray thing's hand passed through the air where I'd been a second before. Its fingers were too long, ending in points like icicles. When it touched the granite, frost spread out from its fingertips. "Climb!" I yelled to Pete and Jack. "Climb now!" We scrambled up the rock face like our lives depended on it, because they did. The creature followed us, moving up the vertical wall like gravy. Time didn't matter. It made no sound except for a low humming that seemed to come from inside my head. The humming sounded like a song my grandmother used to sing, but twisted and wrong. Jack reached the ledge first and pulled himself over. Pete was right behind him. I was still 10 feet down when I heard Jack scream. The third climber was there all right. Sarah was her name, according to her ID. But she wasn't screaming anymore. She was sitting at the back of the ledge, knees pulled up to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her eyes stared at nothing, and her lips moved without making sound. "She's in shock," Jack said, kneeling beside her. "Complete mental break." I hauled myself over the edge and looked at Sarah more closely. She was whispering something in a language I almost recognized. It sounded like Gaelic, but that was impossible. She was a college kid from Charlotte. "How long has she been like this?" I asked. Pete checked his watch. "Her friends died yesterday morning. She's been alone up here for over 24 hours. But that wasn't right either. The first body we'd found was still warm. He'd died recently, not yesterday. Time was wrong on this mountain. The gray creature appeared at the edge of the ledge like smoke rising from a fire. Up close, I could see it better. Its face was human-shaped, but stretched too long. Its skin looked like fog, shifting and changing. And those empty eyes, they seemed to look right through me, into parts of myself I'd tried to forget. Sarah stopped whispering and looked directly at the creature. "He's been waiting," she said in a clear, calm voice. "He's been waiting for someone who understands." "Understands what?" I asked. "The old words, the Highland words, your grandmother's words." My blood went cold. How could she know about my grandmother? The creature stepped onto the ledge. Where its feet touched the stone, ice flowers bloomed, exactly like the frost patterns I'd seen in my grandmother's pictures of Scotland. "Kate," Pete whispered. "Kate, it's looking at you." He was right. The thing's empty eye, as were fixed on my face. It raised one long hand and pointed at me. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through pine trees. MacLeod. It knew my name. My family name. That's when Jack tried to run. He scrambled toward the edge of the ledge, probably thinking he could rappel down. But the creature moved faster than thought. One moment, it was across the ledge from us. The next, it was right behind Jack. It didn't touch him. It didn't have to. Jack just stopped. His face went blank, then filled with terror. He started backing away from something only he could see, getting closer and closer to the drop-off. "Jack, stop!" I yelled. "There's nothing there." But there was something there. In Jack's mind, the creature was showing him his worst fears. I could see it in his eyes. Whatever he was seeing was real to him. He took one more step backward and fell. I heard him hit the rocks below, but I couldn't look. Pete was already moving toward the edge with the same blank expression Jack had worn. "Pete, no." I grabbed his arm. He turned to look at me, but his eyes were empty. "My daughter," he whispered. "It has my daughter." Pete didn't have a daughter, but the creature was making him see one anyway. I did the only thing I could think of. I started singing. It was a song my grandmother had taught me, a Highland lullaby in Gaelic. The words felt strange in my mouth. I hadn't spoken Gaelic since I was a child. But as I sang, the creature stopped moving. Its empty eyes focused on me with something like surprise. Pete blinked and shook his head. What just happened? Get the girl, I told him, still singing. We're getting off this mountain. But Sarah wouldn't move. She was staring at the creature with a mix of fear and fascination. He's not from here, she said. He came with the first settlers, the Scottish ones. He followed them across the ocean. The creature tilted its head, listening to her. He was their punishment, Sarah continued, for leaving the old country, for abandoning the old ways. He's been sleeping in these mountains for 200 years, waiting for someone who remembered. I stopped singing. Remembered what? Sarah looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than her 20 years. How to send him home. The creature moved closer, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I was standing in a highland glen, surrounded by mountains I'd never seen but somehow knew. The sky was gray and full of low clouds. An old woman in traditional Scottish dress stood beside me, my grandmother, but younger than I'd ever seen her. Katie, she said in her Highland accent, you need to understand. The gray man isn't evil. He's just lost. Around us, the glen filled with mist. In the mist, I could see shapes. People running, crying, carrying bundles of belongings. Families being driven from their homes. The Highland clearances, my grandmother's voice continued. Our people were forced from their lands, scattered across the world. The gray man was their guardian spirit, bound to protect the clans. When they left, he followed. But America isn't his home. He doesn't understand this place. The vision changed. I saw a ship crossing dark ocean waters. In the shadows below deck, the gray man crouched among the Scottish refugees, growing angrier and more confused with each passing day. He feeds on fear and despair, my grandmother said, but only because he's afraid and desperate himself. He's been trying to find his way home for 2 centuries. The vision faded. I was back on the mountain ledge. The creature stood directly in front of me now, close enough that I could see the sadness in those empty eyes. You want to go home, I said to it. It nodded slowly. But you don't know how. Sarah was right. The creature needed someone who remembered the old ways. Someone who could speak the Highland words and understand the Highland grief. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the small leather journal I always carried. It had been my grandmother's, filled with Gaelic prayers and Highland folklore. I'd brought it with me to America when my family moved here, but I'd never really looked at it. Now I opened it with shaking hands. The pages were covered with my grandmother's careful handwriting, prayers, songs, and stories, all in Gaelic. But on the last page, there was something different. A ritual, instructions for sending the lost spirits home. The creature watched as I read. Behind it, Pete was helping Sarah to her feet, getting ready to evacuate the ledge. But I knew we couldn't just run away. The gray man would follow. It would keep killing climbers, keep terrorizing anyone who came to its mountain until someone helped it find peace. I need to do this alone, I told Pete. Kate, no. We stick together. This thing isn't hunting us, I said. It's hunting me, my family. It followed the MacLeods across the ocean, and it won't rest until a MacLeod helps it get home. The creature nodded again. I began to read from the journal, pronouncing the Gaelic words as best I could remember from childhood. The ritual was complex, part prayer, part ceremony, part magical working. It required me to understand the creature's pain, to feel its homesickness as my own. As I spoke, the gray man began to change. Its misty form became more solid, more human. I could see the Highland warrior it had once been, tall and proud, with fierce eyes and traditional dress. It had been beautiful once, before centuries of exile had twisted it into something frightening. The wind picked up around us, but it wasn't the harsh mountain wind anymore. It smelled of heather and highland streams. The mist swirled, and for a moment I could see Scotland, the real Scotland, not just my grandmother's photographs. Go home, I whispered in Gaelic. Your people are waiting. The creature looked at me one last tit. Me. In its eyes I saw gratitude instead of hunger. Then it stepped into the mist and vanished. The storm broke immediately. Clear blue sky appeared overhead and warm sunlight touched the mountain for the first time in days. We got Sarah down safely. She didn't remember much of what had happened, which was probably for the best. The official report said Jack Morrison had fallen during a routine rescue operation. Accidental death, no fault assigned. But I knew better. That was 6 months ago. Sarah recovered completely and went back to college. Pete requested a transfer to a different mountain range, said grandfather. Mountain didn't feel right to him anymore. I stayed. Someone has to watch over this place, because even though the gray man is gone, the mountain remembers. It remembers the fear, the deaths, the supernatural presence that lived here for 2 centuries. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing just right, I can still hear echoes. Highland bagpipes in the distance, whispers in Gaelic. The sound of footsteps on granite where no one should be walking. But it's different now. The sounds aren't threatening anymore. They're just lonely. Like the mountain is homesick for something it never really had. I've started learning Gaelic properly using my grandmother's journal and some books I ordered from Scotland. I practice the old songs, the traditional prayers, not because I have to, but because I want to. The gray man taught me something about the importance of remembering where you came from, and I've noticed changes in myself. I can predict the mountain weather now with perfect accuracy, even when the meteorologists are wrong. I can sense when someone is in trouble on the peaks hours before they call for help. Animals trust me in ways they never did before. I think helping the gray man find his way home created a connection between me and this place. I'm not just a park ranger anymore. I'm a guardian. Last week, a group of hikers found some strange symbols carved into rocks near the summit. Highland Gaelic, just like the ones we saw that terrible February day. But these were different. They weren't marks of anger or confusion. They were messages of gratitude. Thank you, they said in the old language. The way is clear. I had the symbols quietly removed before anyone else could see them. No need to stir up questions I couldn't answer. But I kept photographs. Sometimes I show them to other rangers who've worked these mountains for decades. They get a strange look in their eyes, like they're remembering something they'd tried to forget. Stories they've heard, incidents that never made it into official reports, nights when the mountain felt wrong. They never ask directly, but I can see the question in their faces. Do you know what really happens up there? I always just smile and change the subject. Because the truth is, I don't think the gray man was the only thing that followed the Highland clans to America. Scotland is full of spirits and legends, and people carry their ghosts with them when they travel. Most of the time, those ghosts stay quiet, content to live in memory and story. But sometimes they wake up. My grandmother used to say that the mountains never forget. She was right about that. But she never told me that some mountains are homesick too, or that they sometimes need help remembering who they really are. I'm still Kate McLeod, 8 years a ranger on these peaks. But now I know that some heights aren't too dangerous to climb. They're just too important to leave unguarded. The Highland horror is over. But the Highland Watch has just begun. The end. My name is Robert McAllister, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years now. In that time, I've seen bears tear apart campsites, pulled bodies from rushing creeks, and faced down wild boar that could gut a man with one swipe. I thought I knew what dangerous looked like. I was wrong. It was August of 1958, and the heat was something fierce. The mountains were bone dry from weeks without rain. Every day we got reports of small fires starting up, and the whole park felt like a tinderbox waiting for a spark. That's when the Henderson family went missing. 4 people don't just vanish in my mountains, not without a trace. I'd been tracking since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. My grandfather on my mother's side was Cherokee, and he taught me to read the forest like other folks read newspapers. Every broken twig, Every disturbed leaf, every animal track told a story. The mountains had been my whole life, especially after Sarah died 3 years back. Lost her and our baby boy in childbirth, and these hills were all I had left. The call came in around noon on a Tuesday. Family of 4, Tom and Janet Henderson, their 2 kids aged 8 and 12, hadn't checked in from their camping trip near Cataract Falls. That waterfall sits way back in the mountains, accessible only by a trail that'd test a mountain goat. Most tourists never made it that far, which is why the Hendersons picked it. They wanted to get away from crowds. I loaded up my Winchester Model 70 and headed out with my usual gear. Military surplus from Korea, reliable compass, first aid kit, enough supplies for 3 days if needed. The 30-06 had never let me down, whether I was putting down a rabid raccoon or dropping a black bear that got too comfortable around campsites. Senior Ranger Williams met me at the trailhead. Bill Williams had 23Y. Ears in these mountains and knew them better than anyone. If he looked worried, there was good reason. "Bobby," he said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt, "something ain't right about this one. Found their campsite this morning. Looked like a tornado hit it." We hiked in together, and the deeper we went, the quieter the forest got. That should have been my first warning. August in the Smokies should be alive with sound. Birds calling, insects buzzing, squirrels chattering in the trees. But as we got closer to Cataract Falls, everything went dead silent. "You notice that?" I asked Bill. He nodded, his weathered face creased with worry. "Haven't heard so much as a cricket for the last half mile." The campsite looked like a war zone. The tent was shredded, not cut clean like a knife would do, but torn apart by something with incredible strength. Sleeping bags scattered everywhere, some hanging from tree branches 15 feet up. Their car was still there, windshield spider-webbed like something had punched it. But it was the footprints that stopped me cold. I'd seen every kind of track these mountains had to offer. Bear, deer, wild boar, even the occasional mountain lion that wandered down from up north. These weren't like anything in my experience. 18 inches long, shaped like a man's foot but wider, with clear toe marks that pressed deep into the hard-packed earth. "What do you make of these?" I asked Bill, kneeling down for a closer look. He studied them for a long moment, then shook his head. "Biggest bear track I ever saw was maybe 10 inches. These..." He trailed off, measuring the stride between prints. Whatever made these was walking upright and taking steps longer than a tall man could manage. I tried to think rational. Maybe the tracks were distorted somehow, made to look bigger by rain or something. But we hadn't had rain in 3 weeks. The ground was hard as concrete. That's when I noticed my compass acting up. The needle kept swinging toward the deep woods instead of pointing north. I tapped it, thinking it was broken, but it kept pointing the same direction, toward whatever had made those tracks. The smell hit us next, sweet and sick, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog fur. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. Bill pulled out his handkerchief and covered his nose. "Jesus," he muttered. "What died out here?" I'd smelled death before, plenty of times. This was different. This was alive and wrong, and it made every instinct I had scream at me to run. But 4 people were missing, including 2 children. Running wasn't an option. We followed the tracks deeper into the mountains, toward where the old Cherokee Trail wound up past Cataract Falls. The forest stayed deadly quiet, like every living thing had fled. Even the flies weren't buzzing, and in August heat like this, there should have been swarms of them. The tracks led us through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. Straight-up rock faces, through tangles of mountain laurel so thick a man would need a machete to get through, but the prints kept going, clear as day, pressed into stone like whatever made them weighed more than any living thing had a right to. "Look at this," Bill said, stopping beside a massive oak tree. The trunk was twisted into knots about 12 feet off the ground, like someone had grabbed it and wrung it out like a dish rag. The bark was gouged with claw marks that went deep into the heartwood. I put my hand up to measure. The marks were 8 inches long and spaced wider than a bear's claws. "No animal could do this," I said, but my voice came out shaky. Maybe lightning hit it, Bill suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I'd seen lightning-struck trees before. This wasn't that. This was something with hands and incredible strength that had taken its anger out on a tree that had probably been growing when my Cherokee great-grandfather was a boy. We kept following the trail, and the wrongness kept building. Trees that should have been straight leaned away from the path like they were scared. Rocks were piled in patterns that nature doesn't make, and always that smell, getting stronger as we climbed higher. The trail switchbacked up toward the waterfall, and that's where we found the first body. Tom Henderson was about 50 feet off the path, wedged between two boulders like he'd been thrown there. At first glance, it looked like a bear attack. His chest was caved in, ribs poking through his shirt. But when I got closer, I could see the marks weren't from claws, they were from hands. Finger marks pressed so deep into his chest that they'd crushed bone. The spacing was all wrong for human hands, too wide, too powerful. Tom Henderson had been a big man, maybe 200 pounds of muscle from construction work. Whatever killed him had picked him up and squeezed the life out of him like he was made of paper. "Sweet mother of God," Bill whispered. I checked Tom's body for other injuries, trying to piece together what happened. His rifle was missing, but I found shell casings scattered around. He'd fired at least 6 rounds at whatever attacked him. There was no blood on the ground except his own. The tracks led away from Tom's body and up toward the waterfall. They were deeper now, pressed into solid rock, like the thing was getting heavier or angrier, or both. That's when we heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever experienced. Deep bass thumping, like the biggest drum in the world being beaten slow and steady. It echoed off the mountain walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The rhythm was wrong for a heartbeat, too measured and deliberate. "What the hell is that?" Bill asked, his hand moving to his sidearm. The sound came again, louder this time, and I felt it in my chest like standing too close to thunder, whatever was making that. The noise was big, bigger than anything that should exist in these mountains. We found Janet Henderson next, at the base of Cataract Falls. The waterfall drops about 40 feet into a deep pool surrounded by slick rocks that claimed at least one tourist every summer. But Janet wasn't a victim of slippery stones. She was hanging from a tree branch 20 feet up, her body twisted in ways that made me sick to look at. The branch should have broken under her weight, but it held somehow, bent down toward the water like a fishing rod with a big catch. "How did she get up there?" Bill asked, but I was already looking at the tree trunk. Claw marks. 4 parallel gouges spiraling up the bark, too wide and too deep for any bear I'd ever seen. Whatever had done this had climbed straight up carrying Janet's body, then hung her from the branch like some kind of sick warning. The drumming sound came again, closer now, and with it came something else. A scream that started low and human, but rose into something that couldn't have come from any throat that ever drew breath. It went on for nearly a minute, echoing off the rock walls until it seemed like the whole mountain was screaming. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse through the trees on the far side of the waterfall. A shadow moving upright between the pines, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too broad through the shoulders, moving with a fluid grace that didn't match its size. I raised my rifle and tried to get a clear shot, but the thing melted back into the forest like smoke. All I was left with was the certainty that something was watching us, something that had killed 2 people and taken 2 children into the deep woods. "We need to call for backup," Bill said, his voice tight with fear. But our radios had been acting up since we'd started following the tracks, picking up nothing but static. Whatever was out there, it didn't want us calling for help. The drumming came once more, farther away now, leading us deeper into the mountains. It sounded almost like a challenge, daring us to follow. 2 children were still missing. We had no choice. We climbed higher, following the increasingly bizarre trail toward the sound of that rhythmic drumming. The air got thinner and the woods got stranger. Trees grew in spirals, their branches intertwined in patterns that hurt to look at. Rocks were stacked in impossible towers that should have fallen over but didn't. The smell was so strong now it felt like breathing through wet wool. Bill had given up trying to cover his nose and was just pushing through, his face green around the edges. "Bobby," he said, voice strained, "maybe we should head back. Get the state police, bring up a proper search team." Part of me wanted to agree. Every rational thought in my head was screaming at me to turn around, get off this mountain, and never come back. But I kept thinking about those two Henderson kids, 8 and 12 years old, somewhere out there with whatever had killed their parents. "Just a little farther," I said. "If we don't find them in the next hour, we'll head back." That's when the hunting party showed up. We heard them coming down the trail behind us, 5 men from town with hunting rifles and grim faces. They were led by Mayor Hutchins, a fat man who'd never shot anything more dangerous than a deer in his whole life. "Found the car at the trailhead," Hutchins said, breathing hard from the climb. "Figured you boys might need some help." I tried to explain what we'd found, but Hutchins wasn't listening. He was pumped up on adrenaline and civic duty, ready to hunt down whatever rogue bear had killed the Hendersons. "Biggest bear tracks I ever seen," said Jimmy Morrison, studying the ground. "But a bear's still just a bear. 6 rifles ought to be enough." I wanted to tell them this wasn't a bear, that nothing natural could have made those claw marks or hung Janet Henderson from that tree branch. But how do you explain seeds? Something you don't understand yourself? We spread out and kept following the trail. The drumming had stopped, but now there were other sounds. Branches snapping in the distance, rocks falling with no apparent cause, and underneath it all, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The attack came without warning. One second, Jimmy Morrison was examining a broken tree branch. The next, he was flying through the air like he'd been hit by a truck. He slammed into a pine tree so hard the trunk cracked, then slid to the ground in a heap that wasn't moving. The rest of us spun around, rifles raised. But there was nothing to shoot at. Just forest and shadows, and that terrible smell getting stronger by the second. "Where is it?" Mayor Hutchins shouted, his voice cracking with panic. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 red dots glowing in the shadows about 10 feet off the ground, watching us with an intelligence that made my blood freeze. They weren't animal eyes. There was thought behind them, calculation, and something that might have been amusement. "There!" I shouted, swinging my rifle toward the glow. The thing moved before I could fire. Not fast like a deer or even quick like a bear. Fluid, like water flowing uphill, covering ground that should have taken 3 steps in one impossible bound. Tom Brewster got off 2 shots before it hit him. The bullets seemed to just disappear into the shadow, making no difference at all. Then the thing wrapped what looked like an arm around Tom's chest and lifted him off his feet. I heard ribs snapping like dry kindling. The creature held Tom up for a moment, almost like it was showing him off, then threw him into the underbrush with casual strength. He hit a boulder and didn't get back up. "Jesus Christ," someone screamed, but I was already firing. I put 3 rounds center mass into the shadow, aiming for where the heart should be. The creature staggered back a step, and for a moment I thought I'd hurt it. Then it straightened up and took a step toward me. The bullets had torn holes in whatever it was, wearing, but there was no blood. No indication I'd done any damage at all. That's when it stepped fully into the light, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had been hunting us. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, covered in coarse brown hair that looked more like wire than fur. Its shoulders were broader than any 2 men, and its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands that could palm a basketball. The face was almost human, but wrong in every detail. Too wide, too flat, with yellow teeth the size of piano keys and those burning red eyes that seemed to look right through me. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that scared me most. This wasn't some dumb animal acting on instinct. This thing was thinking, planning, enjoying the hunt. It opened its mouth and let out that screaming roar again, so loud it made my ears ring. Then it started walking toward us, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. Mayor Hutchins emptied his rifle at it, screaming as he fired. The bullets hit. I could see the impacts, but they might as well have been spitballs. The creature didn't even slow down. "Run!" Bill shouted, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The world had gone strange and liquid. Time moved like honey, and every step felt like running through deep mud. Behind us, I could hear the creature following, not hurrying, just walking with those impossible strides that covered twice the ground our running steps did. We made it maybe 100 yards before Bill stumbled and fell hard against a tree. When I turned back to help him, the creature was right there, close enough that I could smell its breath, like rotting meat and sulfur. It reached out with one massive hand and grabbed Bill around the waist. He looked so small in its grip, like a child's doll. The creature lifted him up until they were eye to eye, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then it squeezed. The sound Bill made will haunt me until the day I die. The creature dropped his body and turned those red eyes on me. I was alone on the mountain with a monster, and my rifle was empty. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through undergrowth that tore at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear the creature following, its footsteps shaking the ground like thunder. But it wasn't hurrying. It knew these mountains better than I did, knew every trail and hiding spot. It was playing with me. I broke through into a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd been ranging these mountains for 15 years. In the center stood a massive cave mouth, dark as the inside of a coffin. The smell coming from inside was so strong it made me gag. That's where I found the children. Tommy and Sarah Henderson were huddled against the back wall of the cave, alive but scared out of their minds. They looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "Are you here to save us?" Tommy whispered. I wanted to say yes, but before I could answer, the creature filled the cave entrance. Up close, in the dim light filtering through the opening, I could see details I'd missed before. Scars crisscrossed its hide like it had been in 100 fights. Its hands ended in claws that could tear through steel. And its eyes, those eyes held a terrible intelligence. But there was something else in those eyes. Something I recognized from my own mirror after Sarah died. Pain. The creature looked at the children, then at me, and made a sound I hadn't heard before. Low and mournful, like a mother mourning her babies. It reached toward the kids, not threatening, almost gentle. That's when I understood. This wasn't just some monster killing for sport. It was protecting something. The cave was full of bones, some human, some animal, but scattered among them were smaller bones, baby bones. Someone had killed its young. My grandfather's stories came flooding back, tales the Cherokee used to tell about the Kekle-Kudle, the hairy savage that lived deep in the mountains. They said it was peaceful and less threatened, that it only attacked when men invaded its territory or hurt its family. The logging camps in the 1920s, they'd cut deep into these mountains, probably destroyed nests or killed young ones. The creature had been protecting its home the only way it knew how. But understanding didn't change the fact that it had killed 6 people and would probably kill me and the children too. I still had one chance. My rifle was empty, but I had something else. The emergency flare in my pack, meant for signaling search planes. In these drought conditions, it would start a fire that could burn for miles. The creature took a step into the cave, and I pulled the pin. The flare burst to life with a brilliant red light that filled the cave like the fires of hell. The creature screamed and threw its arms up to shield its eyes, backing toward the entrance. "Run!" I shouted to the kids, pushing them toward a crack in the back wall I'd spotted. We squeezed through just as the flare set the dry brush outside the cave on fire. The creature was trapped between the flames and the rock walls, roaring in anger and pain. But as we ran through the narrow passage that led out the backside of the mountain, I could hear it breaking through the rock behind us. Even fire couldn't stop it for long. We emerged into daylight just as the forest fire began to spread in earnest. The creature burst out of the cave mouth, its fur smoking, those red eyes fixed on me with pure hatred. I had nothing left. My rifle was empty, my flare was spent, and the monster was between us and the only trail down the mountain. That's when I remembered something else from my grandfather's stories. The Cherokee said the Kekle-Kudle respected courage, that a man who faced it without running might earn its mercy. I stepped in front of the children and had looked the creature in the eyes. "I know what happened to your babies," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. "I know why you're angry, but these children didn't hurt you. Let them go, and I'll stay." The creature stopped, tilting its massive head like it was trying to understand. For a moment we just stood there staring at each other while the forest burned around us. Then it nodded. Actually nodded, like it understood every word. It stepped aside, leaving the trail clear. The children ran past it toward safety, and it let them go without even looking at them. Its eyes stayed fixed on me. But I had lied. I had no intention of staying to die on that mountain. The moment the kids were clear, I bolted after them. The creature roared behind me, but it didn't follow. Maybe it was too hurt from the fire, or maybe it respected the fact that I'd been willing to sacrifice myself for the children. We made it down the mountain just as the fire department arrived to fight the blaze that would eventually consume 3,000 acres of prime forest. That was 40 years ago, and I still wake up some nights hearing that roar echoing through my dreams. The official report said a rogue bear attacked the Henderson family camping party. 6 people dead, 2 children rescued by quick thinking and Forest Service training. They gave me a medal for bravery. I never told anyone what really happened up there. Who would believe it? A 10-foot monster living in the mountains, killing to protect its territory. They'd have locked me up in the state hospital and thrown away the key. But I know the truth, and so do Tommy and Sarah Henderson. They're grown now, with kids of their own, but sometimes I catch them looking at the mountains with the same haunted expression I see in my own mirror. The area around Cataract Falls was closed to the public after the fire. Dangerous terrain, the signs say. Unstable rock formations. They've never reopened it, and they never will if I have anything to say about it. Because the creature is still up there. I've seen the signs over the years. Trees twisted into knots, rocks piled in impossible patterns, that sweet, sick smell drifting down on the wind when the weather's right. Park rangers find the occasional hiker who went off trail, torn apart by what the coroner's reports always call severe animal attack. I know better. The Cherokee were right about one thing. The Keklikudla has a long memory. It remembers what men did to its family, and it won't forget. As long as people keep pushing deeper into the mountains, disturbing places that should be left alone, it'll keep killing. I retired from the Park Service in 1975, but I still live in a cabin at the base of the mountains. Some nights, when the wind is right, I can hear that drumming sound echoing down from the high peaks, slow and steady, like a giant heartbeat. It's still up there, waiting. And sometimes when young rangers ask me about the old stories, about whether there's any truth to the Cherokee legends of something living in the deep woods, I just tell them to stay on the marked trails. Some things are better left undisturbed. But if you ever find yourself hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains, and you notice the forest getting too quiet, and you smell something sweet and wrong on the wind, remember what I've told you. Turn around. Go back the way you came. And whatever you do, don't look behind you when you hear the drumming start. Because Bobby McAllister learned something up on that mountain 40 years ago, something that changed him forever. There are things in this world that bullets can't kill, fire can't stop, and civilization can't tame. The mountain devil is real, and it's still hunting.